Hey, good morning, everybody. Sorry, we're just getting some stuff straightened out over here, trying to get a few more people on the call from our team to field questions. Hey, Joe. Hey, Mike. Hey, everybody. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through importing some existing cloud resources using OpenTofu. And what I want to do today is we'll call out, a couple of the different tools in the space and what our goals are in generating this infrastructure as code. And I'm going to show you my technique. So we do this pretty frequently. Hey, Ravi. We do this pretty frequently at MassDriver. We're an infrastructure automation company. Sorry, you guys are over here. I've got 3 monitors. Apologies. So we do this a lot for our customers, help them generate infrastructure as code from existing resources. People, tend to do a lot of click ops when they're early in their organizations, and then they need to figure out how to get all that stuff under management. And so there's a ton of different tooling that's in the space. That I've looked at, a bunch of open source tools, and I actually wrote a blog post on this earlier this year that I can share here in just a minute on those different tools, kind of breaking them down. And what we've found is using a lot of these tools, like there's a lot to be desired. And honestly, like the workflows and like how we design the modules really change from company to company. So, kind of using a single, CLI tool like Terraformer or, some of the other tools that are out there for doing this generation never really served us in a way that could serve every single one of our customers. So we kind of got this strategy that we use, and that's what we wanted to share today, is talk about how we use it. And everything you see today is going to be using open source tools. So we're going to use OpenTofu's native import command. I'll show you what I think is probably the best in class tool today that we're also not going to use, Terraformer, which does a pretty good job, but leaves a lot to be desired. And then we're going to essentially take 2 RDS databases in AWS, one that was deployed into a staging environment, one that was deployed into a production environment. They have a bit of disparity between them. And what we're going to do is we're going to generate 2 modules, one for managing the staging, one for managing the production database. And then we're going to abstract them into a single module for Aurora Postgres and back out the differences between those 2 environments. So we can essentially get to the point that we have one module that's well designed, but the ability to have 2 different workspaces in OpenTofu and 2 different sets of variable files that lets you manage the underlying configuration. Yes, William, this is going to be recorded. The recording will, I think it'll automatically get emailed out as soon as the session's over, but we're also going to put it on YouTube. And so when I put it on YouTube, I'll also be creating a GitHub repo with pretty much a lot of the content that I'm talking about, and also just different parts of like labs that you can kind of follow along. So there'll be like a full interactive course that you can go through, or just watch it again because you like seeing my face. I'm sure that's not it, but yeah, no problem. Okay, so I got one of my coworkers here, Michael. He's one of the solutions architects on our teams. He's going to be answering questions in the chat. Feel free to ask questions, as we go. And he might put your question up on the screen. If so, I'll pause and probably talk about that a bit as well. I want to make sure that everybody is able to follow along here. So first, what I do want to say is I've seen many teams kind of like fall on this sword a lot, and it's when they first start getting into infrastructure as code. Even if you've been doing ClickOps for a very long time, and you're getting into infrastructure as code for the first time, doing reverse Terraform or importing infrastructure is not your first task that you should do, honestly. So if you're new to infrastructure as code, you've never touched it before, and this is where you think you're going to learn how to start doing infrastructure as code, like this isn't the place. What I'd honestly suggest, if you've got an org where you've done a lot of ClickOps and you're thinking about starting to adopt infrastructure as code, start with something greenfield. Find a project that is something new in the business that you can start to model how your workflows are going to work, how you want to design and organize your infrastructure as code. When you start with reversing everything and generating a bunch of code and importing that stuff into code from existing cloud resources, it can be a lot. I mean, I've seen startups that have 15,000 cloud resources, right? So it can be very tedious to kind of go in there. And what sucks is a lot of times, especially when you haven't been doing infrastructure as code, it's hard to see that win and see the value of the idea and the value of the tooling when you've taken on an enormous project, which is trying to, take everything that's out there now and get it categorized and ordered into places. So I suggest, like, if you're brand new to it, what I would do is like get an idea of like what the workflow is, get an idea of the tools that you like, And then once you've got like a nice little greenfield project where you've stood up maybe a couple of resources, that's when it's time to say, okay, I like our workflow, I like our process, I like our tool chain. Now, how will I back out my code? And the honest reality is, like, IAC organization really comes down to like what your team makeup's like, what the relationship between dev and ops is like, what the desire for the level of self-service is like, and honestly, even like what the tooling is like. If you're using a tool like MassDriver versus an open source tool like Atlantis, we have a lot of different opinions on how you should design and organize your infrastructure as code. And until you've got an idea of like how you want to be essentially running this stuff, it can sometimes be difficult to generate that IAC. So that's just the first thing I want to kind of say before we hop in. Next thing is like striving for parity. So this is kind of leaning on that exact same idea. Teams organize their infrastructure as code in a lot of different ways. And so there's this relic that is there from, so for anybody who's not familiar, OpenTofu is a fork of Terraform after a license change that was made last year. And Terraform is on like a 1.9, OpenTofu is on 1.9-ish. But back in the day, like back in ye old times, in like the Terraform, like 0.7 through like 0.13 days, there wasn't really a great way to manage multiple workspaces. They didn't have the concept of workspaces, right? So it was a little difficult to like have a module that managed a staging and prod version. And so what a lot of people did back in those times were they would essentially use directories to organize their infrastructure as code. So you'd go into a repo, you'd see a dev, you'd see a prod. Inside those two repos, you'd see a bunch of code. And that was great at the time. That's all we had, right? Like we had to make do with what we had. But you'll still see a lot of blog posts. There's just from back in the day, or people like carrying forward these ideas. There was a lot of tooling built around those concepts because Terraform was at that state for such a long time that still exists today. So when you see their products, they kind of suggest organizing it in such a way. And we're not going to do that. Honestly, the idea of having folders that say this is my dev and this is my prod creates a lot of pain for essentially creating the code twice. You have to make it in the dev folder, you have to make it in the prod folder. It creates a great path for disparity. And that is one of the things that we're looking to minimize in ops, right? We want to have a staging or a pre-production environment that is very similar to our production environment. And copying and pasting stuff back and forth is just prone to error and disparity. So one of the things I think people should do as they're starting to use their infrastructure as code is, or start to use infrastructure as code is figure out how to generate or build modules that help you get that parity, right? Like creating the right abstractions for how we're going to run Postgres in AWS, for example, today. And what fields should we expose so that we can have a staging and a production driven by the same module with different inputs. And so to start this off, I'm going to show you probably the most powerful piece of technology anybody's ever seen. And you're all going to roll your eyes when you see it. But I tell you what, it is tried and true, the best way that I have seen to get this under wraps when you start to do infrastructure as code. And so with that, I'm going to show you the most beautiful piece of technology you've ever seen. This is almost a shit post live, but it's also genuinely how I feel about it. And that is the spreadsheet, a masterful piece of technology that has lived through the ages. And so, I being a bit tongue-in-cheek about it, but there's some real value to starting to do this from Joe. Yes, Joe loves it. There's some real value in starting to do this from a spreadsheet. So first off, like when you're trying to reverse infrastructure as code, you probably don't have a great tagging strategy already, right? If people have just been doing ClickOps for years, they've very unlikely have been applying tags in a consistent manner. And one of the easiest ways to kind of catalog and manage infrastructure and bring it under management of an IAC tool is starting with tags so you can kind of find the things that are all grouped together. Increase text size of the spreadsheet, bing, bang, boom. Is that good? Ravi, is that great? And we're going to pop back and forth between this and VS Code, just a heads up. And I code with a white terminal, so apologies for your retinas. So why is a spreadsheet important? So first off, one of the things I like to do with this, especially when we haven't started managing resources in the cloud, and we don't have a really good tagging strategy. Let me throw it up one more time. There we go. How's that? Almost everything's on the screen. I can work with that. So the importance of the spreadsheet is twofold, maybe threefold. One is it allows you to start getting an inventory of all of these different AWS resources or GCP resources or whatnot, right? If you start to reverse Terraform or generate IAC from existing cloud resources without just a central place for you to kind of keep track of what you've done, it gets very hectic, especially if you have more than one person working on it, right? So being able to kind of come in here and say, okay, here's all the cloud resources we have. Maybe there's resources that you want to omit from infrastructure as code, and there definitely is, right? Like kind of getting that under control in a place where the whole team can see it and work from. The other thing that's nice with this is, and you'll see what I'm kind of doing here, is I actually start to kind of do some pseudocode like right here. So as I'm going through this, I say, okay, you know what? I know that this is an RDS cluster, database instances. Where are they? Here's one right here. The ARNs are a little wishy-washy. Like that ARN could be for a database instance, or it could be for an RDS cluster instance. AWS doesn't differentiate from the ARN. Right. And so what this allows you to do is not only catalog the inventory of the cloud that you have, keep everybody on the same page, but it lets you start thinking through what our tagging strategy is going to look like, how we can assign cost centers, assign who owns this resources, but also lets you start modeling what the actual Terraform is going to look like. And I find this extremely beneficial because what we're actually going to do is, I'm going to show you in a second, I've just got this tiny Ruby script. It's about, I think, 30 lines of code that takes this CSV and can generate Terraform from it. So without grabbing a bunch of crazy tools, downloading stuff, figuring out how all these other tools work, I've just got a little snippet that I'm able to run. And what's nice about this is instead of like running a tool and having it generate a bunch of stuff, I'm literally just running the CSV file through over and over and over and over again until I get it right. And what you'll see is that it's very error prone to generate infrastructure as code or import infrastructure as code from existing cloud resources. One of the first things people tend to trip up on is in AWS, we have this concept of an ARN, and the end of an ARN, sorry, this is a bit in the weeds, but just kind of detailing why we're doing this. At the end of the ARN, there's this last portion right here. And the last portion of an ARN could be an ID or it could be a name, right? And so AWS sometimes assigns IDs to things like this. And sometimes it's an ID that I get to pick like this. And so the caveat there is the Terraform provider doesn't always accept ARNs, right? So if you're using something like the AWS resource tagging API, or if you're using the AWS CLIs to pull all the ARNs of all your resources, or even if you're clicking around in the AWS console trying to find all of your resources and you're grabbing their ARNs, those ARNs aren't necessarily going to work in Terraform. Some resources need just the last portion, the ID or name portion. And so what I like to do is bring everything in here, have all the ARNs. I kind of made this a truncated version of what I usually do, just so we didn't have a ton of stuff here. But I'll usually have an ARN column and then essentially like the ID column on the right, just so I kind of have both. It makes it just a little easier to kind of navigate when you're doing 10,000 of these. And so what happens a lot of times when I'm doing this is I'll run this Ruby script, which we're going to see in a second. It'll generate the IAC. When the importing starts to run from the Tofu or the Terraform command, you'll see some resources just don't show up. And so I'm like, hey, why didn't my CloudWatch metric show up in this module? It's because I started with the ARN, right? And the truth of the matter is there's 200 AWS services. So remembering which resource takes an ARN versus an ID is hard, right? So I like to start with the ARNs. When I see the resources not showing up, I know exactly why. That one's an ID. And I just change it from the ARN to the ID. And then I rerun the script until it's got everything in there that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of talk through some of these columns. I'm going to tell you guys how I got this information and how you can get this information as you get started. This is the hardest part, is building this spreadsheet. And it's one of those things that's not really exciting to watch somebody do. I luckily actually built all of these resources with infrastructure as code modules. So I had modules that I set up and deployed all these resources with, and now I'm trying to back it out to an IAC module for the exercise, right? And so when I ran that model or set module, it auto tagged all of my resources. So I was very easily able to grab this list of ARNs by just using the AWS resource tagging API. Now that's just something that's probably not going to be available to the average person who's doing this, because again, you probably didn't have a great tagging strategy in place. So what I'll do is just talk through a couple of these columns really quick, and then we'll pop open this Ruby script, and I'll kind of tell you like how and why it's doing what, and how it's going to organize my code, and how I'm going to use that to back out these modules. So what I like to do is I like to prefix all these with just a little bit of data, like metadata, for just the metadata that I need to know. This is just stuff for the team that's working on this to know, like, this is the resource, this is the AWS account that it's in. Sometimes I'll use these things depending on what's going on in a project. I might write metadata in as comments, or I might use something like this metadata account to like initialize the provider block for Terraform. Over here, I got a couple of them that start with OTF. So that's OpenTofu. These are things that I'm actually going to use in the generated OpenTofu. So I'm going to interpolate this like right into a file. And then I also do all the things that I consider tags. I just prefix them with tags. And so the reason I do this with tags specifically is I have another Ruby script that I will generally run when I first start doing something like this. That'll go through every single resource. It'll find all the tags that we've essentially put in this spreadsheet and add tags to all those resources, just so stuff's kind of tagged already, right? So one of the things of like you trying to get all these resources under management is like, we need to let people know like, hey, Corey has started to back these resources out into OpenTofu, right? And so now you have a manage by tag on this resource. So you go, oh, okay, I probably shouldn't click ops this anymore because somebody's starting to bring it into infrastructure as code. I think a great pairing there, we won't really get into this because this is like probably a hyper inflammatory take, but one of the things I think teams should do is if you have a managed by tag where you're using to say like, hey, this is managed by a particular piece of software like OpenTofu or Terraform, or heck, even, you know, maybe something in like your Helm charts or whatnot. You can, if you want to, truly stop drift from happening. You can do that with IAM. So you can make rules in AWS and say, hey, if something has the managed by tag set, the only thing that can change it is this automation role, right? And so now it actually becomes impossible for somebody to create drift while you're trying to back all this stuff out, right? So the reason I say that's a bit inflammatory is I think it's a great approach. It can be jarring to a team who's been doing ClickOps and doesn't know that you're, you know, at the same time working on something else. But honestly, like when people are ClickOpsing stuff and you're trying to back it out into infrastructure as code, it can get a bit contentious if people are making frequent changes to resources. So I think it's something good to do. Not everybody agrees with it. So that's why I prefix these. These are kind of the tags I like to use to get started. And we'll also use some of these tags in how we're going to lay out this infrastructure as code. Now, I don't think these are necessarily the tags that your team should use. People's tagging strategies really come down to their organization. But what I've got here is a couple things I think are important. So one is managed by, just saying that it's managed by a tool so that you know it's not something somebody's ClickOps, you know which tool owns it. The other thing I think is really important is tagging what infrastructure as code module it came from, right? Like this is small, it's meta, but this is one of those things that can really help when you're debugging something 2 months from now. If you're looking at a database in the cloud and you're like, okay, I can see that it's owned by OpenTofu, that's what's managing it, but like, how did it get here, right? Like knowing what Terraform module a cloud resource came from is hard to figure out, especially if you have more than one Aurora, right? I might have Aurora Postgres, which is my common module that I say, hey, developers, if you need database, use the Aurora Postgres module. It's going to get you a database. If you need something that doesn't quite fit the use case of that, and you need an Aurora Postgres, like super high availability version, like I'm going to make you that module because you've come off the beaten path and you need that support. But what I want to be able to do is be able to trace back where these resources actually came from, right? So if there is a problem with a resource, maybe we find that there's a security vulnerability in this Postgres cluster. I can see it came from this Aurora Postgres module, and then I know that any other database that came from that Aurora Postgres module might have that same vulnerability, right? And so now I can go back and fix it versus just looking at a database and saying, how did this one get here? So I think that tagging your infrastructure with the module it was sourced from is one of those things that is just, it feels pedantic to do when you're doing this, but I'll tell you what, yeah, even that word, yeah, exactly, Joe. But when you're troubleshooting something 3 months down the line, you're like, man, I'm glad I threw that extra tag on there. The other ones I put on here are, I might put something like the owner or the team, just so you know who it is in a pinch when you're looking at it. People will put their cost controls in here, cost centers and whatnot. I think one of the other important ones is whether you call it environment or not, or whatever, however you define your environments in your org. Some people have prod, some people have staging, some people have QA, pre-prod, etc. But just kind of getting that in here as well, so you can know from like looking at something whether it's a production or a staging resource. And I think this is important because, again, AWS doesn't always let you name resources, so you can't guarantee that you've got a really sweet naming convention, because I have no control over what the name of an auto-scaling target is, right? But I do have control over the tags. And then the final thing that I'll put on is like the application or service that like owns this, right? So if there is, and this WK IECR is workshop importing infrastructure as code. It's pretty much the abbreviation for this, just so I could delineate like what's actually in our sandbox accounts versus what I'm using for this this demo. And so the nice part about putting the application on there, again, is like it just helps you kind of catalog stuff later on, right? Like you're going to want this type of information in your reports for cost. You're going to want this when you're trying to troubleshoot something that's gone awry. You want to know not just what team it is, but what application and what environment it belongs to, right? And so I think this is a great set of base tags. You're probably going to have a lot more, but you can go overboard with this, the tags, later. So what's nice is once we get all this in, once we get all this into infrastructure as code, what I'll actually do is I'll start with something real basic right here. And if customers like, oh, we got to put in cost centers, we got to put in these other tags, I'll just rerun this script, or I'll rerun this spreadsheet. And instead of making my import script, I'll have it essentially dump something like TF vars that set the tags for each one of these environments, right? And then I can say, hey, here's a TF vars file with all the tags for that team, right? So having this spreadsheet is kind of like your central database where you're doing all this organization, keeps everybody on the same page, makes it really easy to kind of reproduce stuff quickly without having to run a bunch of shell commands over and over and over again, hoping you still have that in your bash history. So I think I beat on this long enough. Let's build some stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just swap over here really quick and kind of show you this. So this is that same spreadsheet, just as a CSV file. I dumped this locally. I downloaded this. So this is kind of the flow I have. I'll download it, run this Ruby script. Now, the Ruby script, I'll share this when I make the lab, but this is one of these things where like, this is where you are starting to kind of put your organization of how you want to lay out these modules, how you want to think about them. So what we're actually going to do for this is I'm going to go through and I'm going to kind of group all of my resources in the cloud by the IAC module that they're going to go into, right? So I'm going to say, okay, everybody that's built Postgres so far is going to come back to this one Postgres module, and we're going to try to back it out to a bunch of different TF vars and workspaces. I'm going to group it by the module, the application, and the environment. So all those resources will get grouped together. And then for each of those groups, I'm going to write out the import blocks in Terraform. And so what this actually looks like, I'll actually pop over to one that I ran earlier today. Like this is just, you've seen this in Terraform before. If you've done Terraform, it's just the import blocks. It's just a Ruby script that's taken this CSV, splitting it into essentially the intersection of application and environments and IAC modules. And then it's going to lay down this import script for each one. And you'll see I do a couple other fancy things here too. So you can do this with OpenTofu. Actually, honestly, since the fork, I haven't really, sorry, it's a bad hair day, so I'm wearing a hat, but at least it's a GitHub hat. I haven't kept up with Terraform. So most of this tutorial works with Terraform or OpenTofu. They are compatible. I haven't kept up with the features that are in Terraform as much as I probably should have. So one thing that you can do in OpenTofu is you can actually do for each imports, which is pretty wild, right? So if you have, let's say, 13 replicas of an Aurora instance, you can have one resource block with a for each instead of 13, which is kind of how you had to do it in Terraform at least a year ago. So that's what this script kind of does as well. If I were to go into that CSV file and, that spreadsheet, and if I were to add a resource key here, it would actually do the bracket access when it's doing those imports. So this spreadsheet and I'll give the spreadsheet template out as well when I push up the GitHub repo. And then the final thing I do want to point out here is this omit column. So this is one of these things. Is like I'm a person who likes to keep track of stuff. I'm a person who likes to know everything that's out there. One of the things that can be hard is there are some resources that you just do not want in infrastructure as code. And so I'll talk about a couple of them here in just a second. But I still want them in this inventory, as we don't know what we have in the cloud. We're trying to get an understanding of it. And so, with people that are still doing ClickOps on the team while you're trying to do this adoption, they're making new resources constantly, right? And so if I see a resource that's not in this table, I know somebody probably ClickOpsed it. Great, I want to bring that in, figure out how to get it into IAC. So if I'm purposely not putting things in here because I don't want to put them in IAC, that's one of the things that can get confusing when you got 15,000 resources. Is it not in this because I didn't want to put it in IAC, or is it not in this because somebody just created it? And so I use this omit column just to say like, hey, we're keeping track of it in this inventory, but we're going to omit it in the code. And what you'll see in this little Ruby script is, I just kind of skip this thing if omit is set to true. Now, why would you want to omit this? So there's a couple of reasons why. So one, there is things like cluster snapshots, right? You can manage cluster snapshots in Terraform and OpenTofu. I don't see the value in it. I want to set that I'm going to have snapshots, and I want to set that I'm going to maintain them for 35 days, but I don't want to have literally every single snapshot in my IAC. And so when I ran this module originally, it deployed a database, and AWS started taking snapshots of it. It's been up for a couple of days. And so that when I did my tag query to get the list of my ARNs, it gave me some snapshots. So it's like, okay, they're there, but I don't want to put them in my IAC, so I'm going to skip it. The other thing you get is you get these, I don't really know what the word is, but ghost resources. They're things that are showing up in AWS's tagging API that aren't actual resources, or they're like under resources in AWS that like we don't necessarily have access to. And so I know for a fact this cluster right here, let me just highlight this guy right here. This is the cluster that I created. I know that for a fact, but there's also this other identifier that's coming back from AWS that I can't manage with Terraform. And in fact, if I take this cluster ID and I push it into that import block, it'll fail and say that that cluster doesn't exist. But if I hit the tagging API, it'll tell me that cluster ID. So it's not a real resource, but it's something that's coming back from the AWS API. So I'll put that one in there. You know, usually I'll do notes as well on the side of like why I'm omitting it. This is a ghost resource versus this is something that we just don't want to bring under IAC management. And then that was it. That's it. So let's go ahead and pop over here real quick. I'm gonna take a sip of water. So before I run this, I do want to say like there is this concept of the resource tagging API again. Now you can use this in a couple different ways. I'm just going to paste the command here real quick. I'll bop this up to about the same level. Oh, I hope that's visible to everybody. That's a bit too big for my screen, but I can work with it for a minute. So there's this resource tagging API in AWS that if you have done your tagging well throughout your ClickOps journey, you can use this to get all of your ARNs back. And honestly, like if you were lucky enough to do that, great. Like this is the easiest way to kind of populate this spreadsheet to get moving. But the reality is like if you haven't done a good job tagging, like somebody's going to be hunting and pecking either at the CLI or the AWS console. So this is what I was lucky enough to be able to use. It just dumped out all of my resource IDs, and then I kind of threw them into that spreadsheet. So I would just say this is kind of a side journey. If you had great tagging conventions to date, I'd start with this rather than going to the AWS console and trying to hunt and peck everything. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that. So I don't need to run it. Okie doke. Are you discovering those assets don't actually exist by trial and error, or is it a matter of just knowing your environment? You mean, Robert, do you mean like the ghost resources? Like the cluster dash ID that we saw there that I omitted? Let me throw this one up on the screen so everybody can see what. I don't know if you caught that. Do you mean the like ghost resources that don't actually exist? If that's what you mean, then yeah, that's just pure discovery. Like that's not a resource that's even managed. And so if I were to switch over to the module that I wrote to generate all of these resources in the first place, that's not a resource that I managed. It's just some artifact in AWS's tagging API that's coming back. So you kind of like see those and you're like, okay, what is this? And, you know, I spent probably 10 minutes yesterday trying to find this. And it's really wild. If I take this ID right here and I paste it into the AWS console, it'll actually show a search result. And then when I click on the link, it'll 404. Right. So it's some weird artifact that's in AWS and unfortunately just comes back in this tagging API. So it's probably something that if you were in the AWS console or CLI, you'd never see this resource. The only reason I see it is because coming back from this tagging API. As a matter of fact, when I was trying to find this thing, I went to the AWS console first, pasted it in, because it was just failing in Terraform. It wasn't importing it. Pasted it in. It showed it as like a search result. I clicked on it. It 404'd, and then I hit pretty much the RDS describe instances, CloudTrail. I pretty much hit every single thing I knew in the AWS CLI to try to find this resource, and all of them returned essentially a 404 or an empty result set. Okay, I know how to put questions up on the screen. I don't know how to take them down. There we go. Yes, that was just trial and error, but again, it's an artifact of using that tagging API to get these things. You probably won't see it if you're going through the console. Okie doke. So let's do this. Let's go ahead. We talked about the format. Now I will say, one other thing I do run here is, so when I actually run this is what I run. So there is a really cool tool called Mods, M-O-D-S. I've talked about it in a couple other workshops before. You can see it right here at the end. It's by a team called Charm Bracelet. They make a whole bunch of really awesome Go libraries. But Mods is effectively a like the Unix philosophy, but for AI. And so you can like pipe things through it and have it do stuff for you. And the back end of it's pluggable, so you can use, Anthropic or OpenAI or your own models or whatever. And so one of the things I actually did here when I built ours, you can see this prod database, the tags that I'm using to pull this up here. I piped those ARNs and one prompt that I'll share here really quick. And I'll put this in the GitHub as well. But this is essentially a prompt that helps me kind of get all the Terraform resource types that I'm going to actually use. So when we go back to this spreadsheet, you'll see all of these right here. I didn't have to go and search for that, right? I do have some muscle memory. Like when I see a cluster snapshot, I know what the resource type is, but I can never remember the resource type name for a security group for some reason. Or sorry, not security, I got that one. That one's easy. The DB subnet group, right? And so what's nice about like kind of piping it into Mods is like I can say, hey, here's all these ARNs, like tell me what Terraform resource type to use. And then I just kind of pasted that in the spreadsheet to get started. So it's one of the places where I'm starting to bring AI into my workflows, kind of doing these more tedious things that I know that it has a high chance of getting correct. I used to try to use it to kind of back out the differences between these Terraform modules, which we're going to see in a second. But I ran into so much arguing with the prompts that I really just kind of lean on the diff tool now, and I move faster than the AI does. So, but this is one of the places that I found it useful because it's generally pretty correct. Now, if you do use this prompt, I will say it does get things wrong. So, and it's not the AI that gets this wrong; it's the ambiguity of the cloud, right? So, if I look at this instance type here, there's actually two different Terraform resources that can manage this ARN. There's a AWS DB instance and an AWS RDS cluster instance, and you can't differentiate it from looking at the ARN. So even if we used a tool like Terraformer, which I'll just show you this real quick, this is what we're not going to use today. Tools like Terraformer also get this wrong. So when they bring it in, it might make it an AWS DB instance instead of a cluster, and so it seems to be pretty consistent, but I've seen it get it right and I've seen it get it wrong. So it's just one of those things where it's like you have to know as the operations engineer, the person that's designing this module, what the actual resource type is. The AI prompt will get it most of the time, but there's just some resources that have two different Terraform provider resources that can manage it. And so that was one of the ones that I had to change from AWS DB instance. So what I want to talk about is there are other tools out there before we kind of run this script. There is a tool called Terraformer. And so I already ran this. It takes a little bit for it to run, but let me see if I can find the command in my history really quick. Yeah, so let me just grab this. Pop it over here. So the Terraformer commands, so it's an open source tool by I think it's by the Waze team at Google. It's good, but it's one of these things that leaves a bit to be desired, right? You have to learn how the filtering works. Now, it does have other options like import everything or give me every single database. But those are, in my opinion, like dangerous features. Like the idea of importing your entire cloud infrastructure into a single module, like that just makes no sense to me unless you've got a very, very small cloud footprint. The idea of bringing everything under RDS into a single module also doesn't make a ton of sense. And And so with this tool, you kind of have to know, A, what resources you're going to bring in. You have to know the tags to filter it. You have to know the suffixes, or sorry, the abbreviations that they use, and you can run it and it will generate Terraform for you. So we'll see right here, it's got a bunch of Terraform. You can see that it got the instance type wrong. This is actually an AWS RDS cluster instance, but again, like, you can't tell even from the AWS API, like which one of these should be managed by it. You just kind of have to know by like what you've built, right? And so it gets things wrong. It also generates some pretty hellish resource names, right? I don't know if you caught in my form, I actually put the resource names in there. I don't know why every time I click on this, it flips back, but you see that I just put this for all of them, right? Because I like to do AWS RDS cluster this for like the main one, and then I'll use different things than this for like any adjacent pieces of information in there. Like, let's say I'm making an SQSQ, I'll have this for the main one, and then if I want to have a DLQ as well, I'll call that one DLQ, right? And so it lets me type those in here. Otherwise, what you end up doing is you end up going through here and like changing a bunch of stuff, right? So it's like it's generated code for you, but you still have to do the same things that you're going to be doing in that spreadsheet, except for you're doing it after the fact instead of up front, seeing how everybody's naming things, getting things in a naming convention. And honestly, it's so much easier to type this one time and just drag it down than to go to every single block and fix the naming there. So we're not going to use Terraformer. It is a tool to check out. I think, you should definitely not just take my opinion, like go try it out. It is pretty decent. Now, that being said, it also didn't get everything. So I gave it some tags, I gave it some cloud resources, but it didn't get all the stuff that I needed. And so that kind of sucks because I don't, in the Terraformer land, I don't have a spreadsheet to know that there's resources that I missed. I gave it some tags in the cloud services and it just happened to miss a couple of the things in those services with those tags because the Terraformer tool didn't support it. So it's not a tool that I've found to be useful at scale when you're moving lots of organizations from ClickOps to IAC. But maybe if you're a small team and you've got a few hundred resources, that might be the way to go. But I prefer the good old spreadsheet. So let's go ahead and do this. So we're going to just go ahead and nuke this Terraformer directory. I don't care about it. I delete a lot of code. You can regenerate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this import script. So I've already got it. I've already generated this stuff once. I'm going to go ahead and just blow this folder away. Wouldn't it be funny if I accidentally blew away the folder I'm in? That's not what I want to do. There we go. Sweet. Okay, so I'm just going to run this import script. Bada bing, bada boom. And we'll see that it created two modules. Now, I don't want two modules. We talked about this earlier. There was this old notion of creating infrastructure as code and directories for each of the environments, but it leads to disparity. So why did I do this? Well, the reason why is I want to see the disparity so I can back it out into a shared module, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to pop open these two import files really quick, make sure I get them in the right place. Prod will be here, staging will be here. And you can see that there's already like a tad bit of disparity, right? So you can see that there's more resources in this staging environment than in this production environment, right? People were doing ClickOps, they're building things differently. So there's a little bit of disparity there. We can see that I missed a cluster snapshot. That's funny. So I'm just go ahead and remove this one. I don't care about that one. And so what I'll be able to do now is Terraform and OpenTofu actually have commands for taking this and generating IAC. It looks just like the stuff that you see in Terraformer. It actually is less commands though to get there, and it's a bit easier. So what I'm going to do real quick is I just want to look to make sure there's nothing else that creeped into this that I don't want. But you'll still see there's a bit of disparity. It looks like they both have CloudWatch. They both have a subnet. They both have a KMS key. I will say that I would never put a KMS key in the same module as the database that it manages. It is extremely dangerous. RDS cluster, cluster instance, security group, and SNS topic. The reason it's dangerous is when you put a key in the database in the same life, we'll do it here just so we don't have to make 2 or 3 different modules, but I would never actually do this in practice. If the key and the database are in the same life cycle and somebody accidentally deletes the database, they accidentally deleted the key. So your snapshots, which are not in infrastructure as code, still exist, but you don't have a way to decrypt them. Uh-oh, that sucks. So that's one of those little cloud nuances where I'd make the keys elsewhere and bring it in as an input variable. But you can see that there's already some disparity here. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this production one. I'm going to start to bring production under management. I'll bring staging under management. We'll see what the disparity is, and then we're going to back that out. So I can clear this, see where I'm at. So I make a little draft module. You can see my Aurora Postgres. So remember I said everything was Aurora Postgres. If I do a little tree from here, you can see that I've got the project Wigger and then the environment, right? So I just got a little bit of organization. What I want to do is I'm going to pick one of these that's going to be like my new root module or resource module, as they're referred to. So a lot of different terminology in the Terraform and OpenTofu space. Some people refer to them as root modules. They're essentially the modules that define the abstraction. And then child modules are the modules that use that root module to invoke it. So I've got a Postgres module. I've got Postgres prod that invokes it, right? Or my Postgres prod workspace that invokes it. Some people use the terms resource and infrastructure modules. So the resource ones are the ones that make the abstraction. They have the code in it. The infrastructure module is the one that's invoking it, right? So that's what I've got here. So I'm going to take this prod one and I'm going to go into that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate the Terraform using the tofu command. So I'll go into Aurora Postgres prod here. First thing I'll do is I'll do tofu init to initialize OpenTofu. Everybody awake? I went to a happy hour last night, so I'm kind of awake. I don't have happy hours in me anymore after the age of 40. Apparently, my network connection doesn't either. There we go. Okay, so what I did there is I just initialized that current prod one, right? And so now what I'm going to do is there is the first thing I'm going to do is when we do this, we're not only going to generate the code, we're going to generate a state file too. And so I know that I want to be working in workspaces. So one thing to note really quick is you see that by default, when you run Terraform and OpenTofu, you're in a default workspace. I don't like this workspace. This default workspace to me is me screwing around locally. I like to make workspaces for the environments or whatever your team calls them that we're going to be reproducing, right? So whether it's prod or prod US West or prod EU1, whatever it is, I like to go ahead and set up the workspace now so that when I run these commands, it actually generates the state file for prod, which makes it very easy for me to now take this prod module and make it my generalized module and then bring in my staging as well. So then I'll have this one module, 2 TFRs, 2 state files. So I'll do workspace new prod. I'll make my prod workspace. And now what I'm going to go ahead and do is generate config out. So what this does is, and this is all just built into OpenTofu. This is in Terraform as well. What this does is it takes these import blocks here, and we've given it essentially the resource address in Terraform. So the resource type in the name. We see some errors. These errors are fine. You're going to get them with Terraformer and this. I'll describe the errors in a minute here. There's a lot of different errors you're going to get. It did generate the code. It's telling us that it generated invalid code, but we'll get to that in just a second. What we have here is we have the resource name, so essentially the resource address and the ID. These import blocks do two things. When using generate config out, it actually uses them to write the Terraform code. So we'll see this here. I'll pop over really quick and just open the, don't know if that's the right one. Nope, it's over here. It's on my prod side. You'll see that it actually generated all the resources and all the attributes. We don't want to get rid of it. We're going to get rid of this import.tf file in a minute. But what it can also do is it can generate your state. So I don't have state right now. I got code, and I've got code that manages very naively this specific Postgres instance. But what I'll look here and see is, tree this really quick. You can see that I've got a Terraform TF state directory. I've got a prod directory, but I don't have a state file yet. So I'm actually not managing these resources yet. And so what I can do from here is I can do a tofu apply. Cross my fingers super. Oh, this is going to fail. Sorry, this is going to fail because we have our errors. We're going to run tofu apply in just a second, but we got to fix these errors first. When I run tofu apply, what it's actually going to do is, for everybody who's familiar with Terraform and OpenTofu, normally you'll see like, hey, zero additions, 3 changes, 0 removed. When you have the import blocks there, you'll also see an additional line which says imported. And so it'll actually say, hey, do you want to import these 7 resources into state? And so we'll do that here in just a second. But first, we got to solve these errors. So these errors are silly. The errors are silly, and they're just, they're the cloud. They're what we got. So the first thing you see here is signature version. So I'm going to pop over here and search for signature version, and you can see that signature version is set to 0. Now, what is signature version? Because there's so many fields in here, I couldn't even tell you. It's SNS topic signature version. Now, I'll tell you what. I've been working in the cloud since 2005. I have used a whole boatload of SNS. I have no idea what the hell the signature version field is. And I'll tell you this, I didn't set it in the module that made it. Now, why is it set here? Because it's literally taking, when you run that tofu import, it's taking the API response from a GET on that resource on the AWS API, and it's just filling in every single field. And so some fields that are null, it does that like PHP 3 vibe where it's like, oh, by null, you mean 0, right? And so then it's essentially setting it to a version that isn't correct, right? And so the reality is like a lot of these attributes here, I know don't matter to the module that I built, but this is one of those things you have to think through as you're kind of designing this. Is like, which of these attributes actually do we care about, right? You can see there's a lot of stuff that's in here that's just set to null. I personally don't like seeing a bunch of nulls in here. I just remove them. Some people like to set them. Some people like to set these values to the provider's defaults just so it's really explicit. That's up to your team. That's up to your team. But what I'm going to do here is I'm just say signature version. Like I know I didn't set it, so I'm just going to remove it. So that one's pretty straightforward. I'm one of those people that just blows away compute. I don't like reading. That's a lot to read right there. So I'm just going to clear and tofu apply this again, and it's going to give me like 5 more errors. This is my workflow. Don't judge me. And so you see the next one is seconds until pause. So this is interesting. Seconds until pause. So now again, I happen to know that this Postgres Aurora instance is not a serverless instance. I'm going to scroll up here to the top. And I should see if anybody sees it before me, let me know. Let me do db dot there. Oh, maybe it is a serverless one. Maybe I don't know anything after all. It is serverless, but there's a field that is not valid. And so you can see what's funny is like, it tells you what the acceptable ranges are. But again, like I didn't set this seconds until auto pause in the module that produced this. And so Terraform's not going to just pick a value for me. So like these errors aren't really errors. There's so much as like, these are inconsistencies between the API response and how you're going to declaratively manage this. So I got to make decisions now. So the question is, okay, nobody set this in the first place. I can either go and figure out what the default is, which is somewhere between 300 and 8,640, whatever, or null, or I can go Google that and try to figure out what it is. But it's like, if it wasn't set in the first place, I'm just kind of like, I'm going to remove it. That's just the way I work. The other ones we're going to see here is this is actually the same error just from both sides. So what we'll see is there's this identifier and identifier prefix here. And so what you'll see is like these two things are conflicting. So I believe that in the module that made this, I set the identifier prefix. And so if you're not familiar with this inside the AWS provider, there's this concept of like setting that you want to use a prefix. And what this is nice is like, you don't have to put the onus on the person using your module to understand necessarily all of the cloud resources that are deployed. There's a lot of things in AWS that per account have to be unique. And when you're picking the names for resources, where the name shows up in the ARN, they do, right? So I can't have 2 different clusters, even if it's 2 different teams, called WKECR prod database, whatever. And so with this, what's nice about this feature is you can just say like, hey, like this is the part that I care about. I want to make sure it's got our team's naming convention in here. But you can say, okay, I'm going to use this prefix field, and it will just throw on a random number at the end. And inside the provider, it keeps track of that inside the Terraform state file. So what's unfortunate for us right now is we got this prefix, we got this identifier. We're just going to kind of set it to this for now. I want it to be set to the other one. We'll straighten that out in the state file later and then switch it back. But I'm just going to remove it now just so we can kind of get through these errors really quick to see the state. So you see, that's great. Now you see it happened again. Name prefix. There's another one in here that does this as well. So that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. There we are. So the security group does the same thing. We set a name prefix, the module that made it. Now, again, you won't have this problem if you are coming from the console or from ClickOps, because somebody's been typing these names in. The only reason that I'm experiencing these specific errors is because I used a Terraform module to make the resources that we're trying to back out. And I used the prefix one in there when I did it. So this isn't something you'll see. Now I'm gonna run this one more time. I think there's gonna be 2 more errors to fix, 3 more errors. I can't count. You'll see data points to alarm. And this is another one where it's just the, it wasn't set in the original call. The API kind of defaults it to that, but it's an invalid value. And then I also have that for performance insights. And that's in 2 places. It's on the cluster and the cluster instance, I believe. So I'm just going to wipe both of those 2. And we might bring those back. So that doesn't mean that this is gone forever, right? Like our Terraform modules, in my opinion, should be viewed as an MVP or an MVM, if you will, the minimum viable module that you iterate on. And so this is my first instance, which is going to get me prod under management. But now my next challenge will be getting staging under management in here. And so as I start to bring the staging code into this module and generalize it, there's probably more fields I'll remove. There's some fields I might bring back. But for now, just to kind of get through these errors so I have a good starting point with some state, I'm just going to clear them out. I think there should be one more. Yeah, performance. Did I not remove them at all? Did I just talk about them and not remove them? There we go. Bingo. So now that worked. And so we'll see here is this will be the big difference if you haven't run imports before, but you've used Terraform before. You normally just see this little section right here. But since I have that import there, it says 7 to import. You can see all my resources here. Now, the tags are a bit of a mess. We'll fix the tags too when we start to bring things over. I don't want to pre-optimize that. When we start to design our variable interface for this, we'll solve this little tag scenario just so there's not so many duplicate tags everywhere. But that looks good. That feels pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and type in yes here. And you'll see that it reported or imported. And now when I run tree, you'll see that now I have this Terraform state file. And I'll go ahead and it's on a private subnet. So if you see the password in here, no big deal. It's also a test database, so I don't really care. Get in there, throw some data in it if you want. But don't screenshot the password. But you can see it's a real state file. Now, one of the things that's goofy is I have to pipe this through JQ to really see it. OpenTofu and Terraform, one of the few places they do differentiate so far is in the output of your state file. Terraform's is still structured, and in OpenTofu, it's just a single line. And I think it has something to do with the state encryption. I don't know exactly why, but it's one of the few things that bothers me. But you can see there, I got a state file. So I've got a module right now. I can tofu apply. Apply complete, resources 0, change 0, destroy 0. Right, so now what I've got is I've got a state file. I've got a tofu workspace called prod that I'm in. I've got a state file for prod. I've got a configuration that works pretty well. But now what I want to do is I want to introduce the parity between these 2 modules, right? So if I switch over here and I go to I'm back to this import TF, right? And so for staging, I need to kind of walk through the same thing. So I'm going to kind of blast through this one a little quicker. If there's any questions, feel free to drop them here. I'm just going to kind of run through that. I'll talk through it as I'm doing it. I won't go into as much detail. But if there's any questions, throw them up. Michael will field a couple. And then if there's any that are kind of relative to like what we're at right now, he'll throw them on the screen and I'll answer them. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and do the same things I did before. So I'll do a tofu init just to get all my providers set up. And so I didn't actually set my provider in my Terraform versions. We will do that as well when we kind of formalize this into a generalized module. But for now, I'm just Terraform configure or OpenTofu Terraform can figure it out based off of the resource addresses. So I went ahead and did that. Now I'll do, I'm not going to do the state stuff here because I'm actually going to do the state and the workspaces stuff in that prod module. I'm going to treat that prod module as our generalized module. I'll change the name of it from prod just to Aurora Postgres, and then we'll add another workspace there. So I'll skip that part, but I will go ahead and do the code generation. So generate config out. I'm going to dump that to main TF. And we're going to get like mostly the same code. Now some stuff's going to be different because there's different attributes that are set. You can see that we got this big old dump of errors here. And so I'm going to go ahead and slide this off to the side for a minute. I'm going to close these 2 imports. And, oh shoot, what did I do? That wasn't saved. I'll go ahead and save it now. Let me do this real quick. Remove main, rerun that. I think I removed that snapshot earlier and I didn't save the file. So now I have, okay, so this is my staging, this is my prod. So now this is the part that sucks. This doesn't suck because it's hard. This sucks because this is like the most tedious part of it all. So I said earlier that I used to try to do, use AI for this part right here. And I spent a lot of time trying to get the prompts right, and even using something like Cursor. So this is VS Code. Using Cursor to do this is a little frustrating. But what I want to do right here is I want to start to find what's the difference between the production version and the staging version, right? Now, the easiest way to do this is a good old diff. Diff's great. The problem is these are definitely, they don't, it's Terraform. They don't generate in the same order. Although I just realized as I'm saying this, you can control the threading of the Terraform and Tofu CLI. I'm curious if you set it to a single thread, would it actually generate it in the same order? Because it's essentially doing a bunch of GET requests, and as they get resolved, it's writing it to the file. So that's something I'm definitely gonna have to check into after this, because that would be super tight. But when you run it in its normal mode, at least, it fires off all of the HTTP gets for, you know, these 7 resources that we have here. And as they come back from AWS, it adds a block. So like you don't necessarily have a guaranteed order that you're going to see here. So the boring part is I'm actually going to go through and reorder both of these so that they're in the same alphabetical order. I'm going to fix the errors that we have over here, which I think and hope are going to be the same. And then what I'm going to do is diff. And what I'm going to see is hopefully just diffs on the right side of these equal signs. I might see some diffs on the left side where there's like an actual attribute that's missing because maybe they're so disparate today, these 2 resources. So I don't know what I'm going to get here. So it'll be a little interesting. So first thing I'm going to do is roll these up, and then I'm just going to reorder them. So it blows my mind that there's not a VS Code plugin that does this. There's one that does it for variables. I'm complaining about it. Maybe I should go write it, but I don't have time. But I've piped this through AI so many times, and honestly, it's faster for me to reorder 7 to 10 modules than to look at the diff that it generates from something like Cursor. Like you end up with just this massive diff, and then you kind of blindly apply it because it's so massive, and then you're like, did it get everything the same? I have no idea. And I've seen it where it's removed stuff, added stuff, like just got all pizzazzy with it, and it's just like, I just want to order these in alphabetical order. So I'm going to yank the comments out first because this ain't going to be generated for long. We're going to own this stuff. Then I'll do the same over here. And then we'll reorder them. Nice to do. How do you order stuff in Terraform? Wow. I'm sure there's probably a best practices website that tells you. Honestly, like I try to keep, I have a couple of things I like to do. So first off, I like to put the thing that is front and center at the top, right? So this is an Aurora Postgres cluster. So I'll put the cluster at the top. I'll put my cluster instance at the top. Now, I'll eventually want this cluster instance to probably be a 4 each. It's not right now because each of these just have a single instance in them. If you did have an environment that had multiple cluster instances, like this generalization will go a little bit differently, but I tend to put the main resources at the top, the one that the module is actually about. And then there's like, in the cloud, there's all these other auxiliary resources, right? And we're probably even missing a few here, right? Like there's some IAM policies that I know should probably be in here. I didn't catch them because I ran the tagging, and you can't tag a policy. So that those policies aren't coming back. So there's probably other resources I'm going to want to add on. But my general philosophy for ordering and organizing a Terraform module is once I get to the point where I'm like, this main TF feels like it has too much in it, a lot of times people will reach for, oh, I'll just add another file in this directory and call it whatever TF, right? Some people like to do this from the get-go. They'll have main TF that has their cluster, and then they'll have instances TF that has their instances, and they'll have subnets TF, right? Like that's just, for a module where you only have 7 resources, that's a lot of files to open, right? And like Terraform doesn't care. It treats the entire directory as like one file, right? So one of my philosophies is if I'm looking at a main TF and it feels cumbersome, that module might be doing too much. And so, because Terraform uses a DAG, yeah. Did I put you to sleep, Sean, or did I freeze? I saw that my signal dropped down to 1 bar, so I hope I didn't freeze. Or are you saying because I put my legs up? So we'll get these in order. I'm going to order them here just so we can diff easily. But as soon as I see a main TF that's super long, I'm usually thinking, should this be in the same module, right? Like, what does my blast radius look like? So I'm just going to go ahead and reorder these really quick. I'm going to bring the cluster ones up to the top. And then everything else I just kind of do in alphabetical order. So let's go ahead and do this. Alphabetical order. I barely know the alphabet. Let's go ahead and grab these two. Throw them here. Boop, boop. SNS, KMS key goes above that. And again, I wouldn't actually put a KMS key in this module, but we'll do it today just so we don't have to make 2 more modules. There we go. And I'm going to make this other one match this. And then I'll run Terraform or Tofu format just to get them all formatted. And then we'll do a diff. So we'll go ahead and pop over here. Okay, next CloudWatch metric. Subnet group. I know this is super boring. Again, if somebody wants, if I can like nerd snipe somebody into making a VS Code extension that just sorts all your blocks, would love it. KMS key, security group, great. So here we go. So these look about organized. They're definitely not in parity, but where am I at? I'm going to do Tofu format here. Do Tofu format here, just make sure they're all formatted. And then I'm going to diff and staging. Man, this is what I'm looking for here. So we're going to see a lot of noise about the tags. We'll solve that one pretty easily. And then we're going to see a couple other things here. So let me get to the top of this. Ooh, that's a big block. So I have 2 of these out of order. I have 2 of these out of order. Cluster instance. All right, so some stuff there. So what I'm doing, I'm trying to figure out is like so what I'm doing from here is trying to figure out what fields we need to kind of remove, right? So I know that there's still errors in this staging module. I'm going to fix those errors really quick just so we can get a cleaner output here. Tofu apply. Actually, I'm going to do one thing really quick. I will do workspace new staging. Tofu. Okay, sweet. I made the staging one because I'm going to run apply a couple of times to find all these errors and fix them so I can get a cleaner diff. And when I run it the last time, it's going to create a state file. So I figured might as well create it in the same place so I can just copy it over to the other one and create a workspace over there. So I'm going to do a Tofu apply again, and we're going to have a lot of the same errors we had before around performance insights and like the name prefixes and whatnot. So go ahead and grab this first one, which is this prefix here. Cluster identifier. Prefix. Ooh, that's fun. Pop these up side by side. Line 10. Okay, that one didn't get it. That's nice. Let's see, data points to alarm. And I'm just going to wipe a few of these that I know we didn't have set. Signature version. Yeah, I copy and paste everything. That's me. Okie doke. Scaling configuration. Autopause, we'll pull that one out. Identifier prefix. Okay, we kept the actual name ones earlier. Identifier prefix, name prefix is the other one. There we go. I'm pull the name prefix out. That should be, I think there's like 2 more left. Yeah, performance insights. Let's go ahead and yank these 2, and I think we'll get a much cleaner diff now. configuration for import target does not exist. Did I delete something? No, let me do this really quick. Tofu plan. So something interesting is going on there. Just take a gander real quick. Okay. Okay, let's see this. There's one thing that's not importing. Configuration for import target does not exist. Configuration for the given import does not exist. All target instances must have associated configuration imported. We did get an autoscaler over here, right? Autoscaler. Okay. Did I delete that when I did it, or did it not get it the first time? Let me make sure this is the resource name. I might have got the resource name wrong. Nope, that's the resource name. All right, let's do this. Let's do, let's go ahead and manually add it for now. I'm gonna throw it down here at the bottom. So this is one of the interesting things that we will have disparity on is this one ended up getting an auto scaling target. The other one didn't. I think that's the production version of this Aurora Postgres was serverless. And I believe that this one may be an actual instance base. Let me see really quick. DB dot. Yeah, so this one's a T3 medium, right? So what happened when we were configuring these is we made our production database that we kind of wanted to bring in with the staging database into the same ISD. One of them happens to be a serverless instance type. That is a very weird phrase to say out loud, but it exists in AWS. Serverless instance type, DB serverless. So it has those auto scaling configs or serverless v2 auto scaling configs. This one, whoever built this one for their staging environment was like, hey, I don't need serverless. I don't need it to infinite scale. I'll use some burstable little medium one, right? Like, hey, it's staging. I'll use a little T3. I don't need infinite scale. And when they did that, they set up some sort of auto scaling targets. So that's what the disparity we're going to see here in a second. So there's going to be actual additional resources in the staging module that aren't in the production module. And so that's one of the things we'll kind of think about as we start to bring these two modules together is what do we want to expose in this module? Do we want to actually enable auto scaling if it's an actual real instance type? Sorry, don't mean to disparage the db.serverless or not. And so I'm going to go ahead and add that block down to the bottom, and we should be able to get this to import to it in just a second. Hopefully it doesn't reintroduce those errors. Let's do Tofu apply. Sweet. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this now. So skill is required, but no, okay. I'm gonna go ahead and just add these fields manually. Resource ID. Ooh, actually, you know what I'm gonna do? I know it's gonna be faster. I'm gonna copy the stuff that I've already formatted over here. I'm just gonna nuke this main TF file. I'm gonna rerun the import. Get used to that. You do it a lot. Don't be afraid to delete that file and start over. So this should hopefully give me that autoscaler or app target main.tf app. Did it not generate it again? It's really interesting that it's not picking that one up. Unexpected format, scalable. I know what I did. I think in the import, I have an invalid identifier for it. Where is it? I bet it's this. Is it that? Is that what it is? That might be what it is. Let me try that again. If not, we might just skip this one resource for now and just take it out of the import, just so we can kind of get moving. Let's see if it errored on that again. Unexpected format. Service names, experimental. Okay, we're going to skip this autoscaler for now. We'll come back to it in a minute. We know that it should be there. I'm just not exactly sure what the format is for the import. Let me see here. Appsca. I thought that was it. Let me try. I'm going to try one more thing really quick. If you all don't mind watching me fiddle around a little bit. That main.tf. Okay, I'm just trying to get all the IDs, all the resources from this staging environment really quick. There is the application on screen. Maybe this is one of those ones that takes an ARN. Let me go ahead and toss the ARN in here really quick and see if that will fix the import. The inconsistency between things that need ARNs and IDs. I get it, but man, it sucks. It's like the most tedious, boring part of the job. Okay, let's see if that got it. If not, we'll just skip that resource for now. And yeah, missed it again, huh? Unexpected format, expected service name, resource ID, scalability dimension. Okay, so that's the funny. So its identifier that it's expecting isn't even, it's not the ARN. It's not the ARN, and it's not the actual ID. It is the resource ID, service namespace. Yes, that's probably going to be like RDS / maybe this. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look into this one a bit more. This is a fun one to discover. We'll skip this one for now because it's another little fun place where the import command actually takes something different. It's not the ARN name or ID. It's whatever that is. So we'll skip that one for now. We got this all. Everything else is kind of in here. We'll pull that out of the import block too, so it'll stop giving us that error. I'll just remove that. And then in this main TF, we'll just paste back in here. So now these should be relatively consistent. Let me just run tofu apply one more time. Sweet. And so it's ready to import. I'll just go ahead and say, yeah, toss it in there. Oh, I guess spell yes with a ES. And then you can see that it made my state file. So I'll actually pull that state file over in a minute. So we'll come back up to the top here. So we've got these two. Now I'm going to do the diff across these two. Main TF, staging, main TF. That's a little cleaner looking. So scroll up to the top here. Yeah, it's a lot more attributes now. Before it was getting, something was off a little bit, and I was seeing a whole bunch of diff on the cluster. But now we're seeing is like, this is what I'm looking for. Like, this is what I'm interested in, right? Like when I'm thinking about like, how do I want to design this module? Like, I don't want to make the user of this module have to put in literally every single attribute to get something done. I want them to be able to put in what they've already put in. They've already introduced some disparity. There's things that they care about. There's a lot of things that are very similar, right? And so kind of looking at this, we can see the left and the right sides here, the left being main, the right being staging. And so you can see that they're in different availability zones. We may or may not care about that, right? Maybe we want them all to be in the same availability zones. Maybe we don't care. Maybe we want it to be random when we pick it, but currently they're in different availability zones. So that is one thing that I will bring up to the top level of this module. Now, I don't like it at the top level of this module. I'll tell you that. But without me getting too much on my propaganda bandwagon, I don't like the idea of people having to think through the availability zones that they're going to land in. I like people thinking about their availability. Do I need it to be standard, high, 100% uptime? What requirements do I have? I want the module to make the decision on zones for me. But we will move this up, at least for the time being, so that we can make a TF vars file for each one of these that sets that. And so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to kind of talk through these real quick, and then we're going to make a vars file in that prod module and 2 TF var files, one for prod, one for staging. We'll move that staging over, and we'll start working on generalizing that module, taking these attributes, pulling them up to variables, and doing variable references. So cluster identifier, that's just straight up a name. You can see it's name, so that's something we're going to want to pull out as well. You can see the cluster members are still following that same pattern. So what I'm seeing right now is there's disparity in availability, there's disparity in naming. So I want to expose both of these as variables so you can control that disparity. They both have a KMS ID. They happen to be different. That's fine. This right here isn't disparity. Both of these modules are creating KMS keys. Again, I wouldn't personally do this, but we're going to do it here just for simplicity's sake. I would probably pass in a KMS ID from KMS key that was maybe created for my project, and I use it on all my databases. But here, the solution for this disparity between these two is not exposing a variable. If we want to make the KMS key here, it'll be referencing the KMS key, right? So as soon as we reference that, they're both going to be AWS KMS key.this.id, right? And so that will go away. Definitely check out Difftastic for structural diffs with HCL support afterwards. Whoa! Hell yeah, Andreas. Dude, I'm glad you come to all of these, man. For everybody else that didn't see this, I'm going to have to... Difftastic. I'm going to toss that in the old notes real quick. Difftastic. Nice. Okay. I'm going to check that out later. I'm over here like a caveman using the diff tool. So the KMS key one, that one's going to go away, but like the username for the database. So Tender Spider and Prepare Docs, Prepare Docs. I don't know. What are we going to do? We're going to dox people, or are we going to ox that's on top of it? I'm not sure. But the username is another one that we're probably going to have to pull out as a variable. Now, the next one is the backup window and the maintenance windows. These two are different. I would be curious, like what made these teams pick these numbers, but for now, we'll just back out the backup window and maintenance window as a variable as well. And then you can see there's a lot of these around tags. So tags in general, we're going to go ahead and pull out and let people specify their tags. Now, what I would honestly do is I would try to compute as many tags as possible for a team. So like maybe have, we have this package ID one here. So this lets us, this is like a very specific instance of a Terraform module. If you're running through like the Massdriver platform, I wouldn't ask the person to input this. Instead, what Massdriver does is it builds this tag for them. And that's what I like to do in my modules is like try to build as much stuff for people, let them put as few inputs as possible and let us compute what we need to. So if you want to, maybe expose an environment staging or prod, right? And expose, so expose that as like an environment or not environment, a Terraform variable, sorry. I might, while that's being exposed as a variable, I wouldn't say, hey, put it in as a tag, right? Like the thing that sucks with tags is like, hey, I need you to put in your tags. It's a map of strings to strings, put them in. But if I say, hey, you can put your tags here. And also I have a top level variable called environment. If we're tracking environments, I can inject that into the tags to make sure that my tagging conventions are consistent, right? And so that's one of the things I like to do is like, I would prefer to expose a variable asking you very explicitly what this is, and then use that to drive some of that configuration, like setting tags. Otherwise, what you end up with is some people capitalize their tags. Some people do it all lowercase. Some people hyphenate it. Some people do it like environment variable style where it's caps and underscores, right? Like you get that real inconsistency. And so for things that are organization wide, I don't want to have to tell the user, hey, remember the key and the value. Just say, hey, like I have an attribute for, or I have a variable for the environment. Put your environment in here, and then we'll set the tag for you. So we'll back the tags out as well. Security group IDs. These are in the same AWS account, but they are in different VPCs. And they have different security group IDs as well. So that is something that we'll take as an input as well. I don't think you should make your databases and your networking things in the same module per se. So we'll kind of just take that in and then use the security group IDs and VPC information that's passed to us. See this availability zone is different for a couple of these. So there's a couple of differences that make sense. There's a couple of differences that don't. So we'll go ahead and start backing these out. You see a lot of them are tied to the name and the environment. That's really easy to back out. And then down here, alarm actions. This is another one where, you can see like cluster volume bytes using 920 terabytes. This is probably just, again, a variable reference or a resource reference that'll go away. So we don't have to expose it. So like kind of looking through here, what I'm seeing is we'll expose the tags. will expose a name, will expose backup windows. We might have to do a couple backup windows. I would love to know, does this team really need 2 different backup windows for one versus the other? Can they all have the same backup window? Just so we're not exposing multiple backup windows and maintenance windows fields. Try to put those on top of each other for now. And then the username for the database, I think, is about it. So let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is we're going to take each of these diffs, and what we're going to try to do is lower them. So I'm going to kind of tick away at these diffs as I build out this module. I'm going to take a rip of some water really quick, though, because I've been flapping gums. Okay, so the first one is this availability zones. So I'm going to drive this from the prod side, because that's going to be my destination module, right? So I've got these 2 modules. My goal is to make a single module that can manage any number of environments. So I'm going to change in here to prod. I no longer need this import, so I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that. Just got my main TF now, so I'm going to touch my variables.tf, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this diff command I ran a second ago and just update it with the paths, just so this is a little easier for me to run, because I'm going to run this a couple of times. There we go. Great. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close that since it's not used anymore. Close that. Open up this variables file. And so the first variable that we saw that we were going to introduce, again, like, I don't love this, but it's what we got right now. But the first one was the availability zones. So we'll go ahead and do availability zones. And then while I'm doing this, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I can get this clean tofu apply. So this is what this is how I'm going to gauge, have I done a good job by my production, right? In production, I usually start with the production module and try to keep this, it's going to fail, I think, because I think I saved that. No, it's good. So what I want to do is, like, I'm at parity, right? With what's in the cloud and what I have in my state file right now is at parity. There's nothing changed here. And so as I go through abstracting the production module to be our generalized module, I want to keep seeing 0 change. That's what I'm aiming for. I don't want to see any changes happen to prod while I'm going through this. So that's what I'm watching for here as I start to back this stuff out. And so the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to add one other file, which is going to be called, and I'll move this later, but right now I'm just going to touch prod.tfvars, and I'll open that up right here, prod.tfvars. And so what I'm going to do is as I remove these hard-coded values, right? So the code that was generated by the Terraform or Tofu CLI is extremely hard-coded, right? It's to manage this instance, not manage the concept of these instances. So I'm going to start to back these out to vars, and I'm also going to set up my TF vars at the same time. So I should see that my code is getting more generalized, but I'm not seeing any diffs in what Tofu wants to do. And I'm probably also going to do plan as well. You should probably run plan, not apply. Just so if you're doing this in a real production environment, you're not nuking things. So the way I'm going to do that is tofu plan -tf, was it var file, prod.tfvars. No changes. That's what I want to see. And so now I'm going to start breaking this out. So I'm going to split 3 columns here. I really hope this isn't too tight for everybody to see. I'll make this a little smaller. I like to see I got a huge monitor. I like to see everything at the same time. And I usually have my birdseed font, so I can kind of see 16 things on my screen at once. So I might have to move this around a little bit. So the first thing is this availability zone. So the type is going to be, what is it, a list of strings. And so the default equal to, whatever. Description, list of availability zones. I don't know if I spelled that right. Availability, I think that's right. So from here, I'm going to stop writing descriptions, just writing the first one, just so nobody balks. I know how to write a description. We're going to focus on just the refactoring. We'll make these variables a lot nicer towards the end. So I got these availability zones here. I'm actually going to remove this, the default, because I want it to tell me that I'm wrong and that I've messed something up. Now it's going to prompt me for my availability zones. That's great. I don't have them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set them here. So, man, I'm going to have to put these on the same tab, I think. We're going to tab back and forth. Sorry, everybody. I'll hide the staging one for now. There we go. So I've got the vars. Actually, this is what we'll do. We'll split this way. Vars, my prod TF vars. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to make this var.availability zones, and then we'll say availability zones. Thanks, autocomplete. I don't need it. Save both of these, and then I should have 0 changes. Love it. So the next one was this naming, right? So I love having a single name for a Terraform module. Nothing drives me more nuts than looking at a Terraform module. It has 107 attributes. Wink, wink to anybody who saw that post the other day. And there's 14 name variables. Like, man, we know what the 2 hardest things are in computer science, right? One of them happens to be naming things. Don't make people name 14 things. So I like to have a single name, and then in every single resource, use that name as a prefix, right? You can call it name, you can call it prefix, call it whatever you want, but it gives you that consistency across all the resources, helps you enforce your naming conventions a little easier. You say, hey, this is the name for the thing. You can put a regex on it to validate it or whatnot, but instead of making people type it in 13 times, make them type it in once. So it's just going to be a type equals string. And the name for this resource is, you can see it pretty consistently here, is this. So what this naming convention is, this is a mass driver naming convention. So this is essentially the project in mass driver, the environment, the name for like this specific instance of this module. And then we throw on a random suffix as well as this other suffix, just to make sure that it is unique within your organization in mass driver. So that's why we're seeing this naming convention here, but do your own naming convention, have a blast. So now this one's going to be fun. So over here, I'm going to type name equals that. And now I got a lot of this to replace. So if I pop back over here, what I'm going to see is, and it's going to be a little problematic when I get over to bringing in staging with these suffixes, because I used index name prefix. Now, again, if you've been doing ClickOps, you're going to have this name prefix option because it's not an AWS thing. It's an AWS provider thing. I'm going to run into an issue with this because I'm effectively going to do, something like var.name, right? But the suffix is going to be wrong for staging. So when I get to staging, I'm actually have to do a little bit of state surgery. And then I'll probably be able to just have the name here and switch back to the way it is in the parent module that I wrote. So I'm going to skip this one for now because I know that one's going to be problematic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of cruise through here. You see, this is one thing that sucks, man. There's 33 instances of this all over this file. It's all over the place. So what I'm going to do is first I'm just going to grab everything that is just a string little literal situation there. I'm going to replace all those. Tofu, apply this one more time, or plan it. No changes, sweet. Now I bet there's still some other suffixy ones on here. Yeah, so you can see alarms. You can see that I use it in the name. This one's great. This one's just in the naming convention for this alarm. So I'll just put that one in the middle here. But it looks like I've got 11 more of these. 11 more of these. So that one, but this one's a reference, right? We made that SNS topic. It has the same name. So I'll be able to replace this one with a reference. This one is just an interpolation in the naming convention. That's cool. var.name. What did I do? That one's another one. So I like including the names of things in my descriptions. It's a good time. Again here. Okay. And so the reason I'm just to clarify something, you can also why am I doing this one by one instead of just finding and replacing every single substring now with this? The reason why is a couple of these are inside of the ARNs of other resources that I know I want to use the same naming convention. So I don't want to replace those. I want to use OpenTofu references for those when I get to those. That's why I'm kind of doing this one at a time instead of finding and replacing all. Right. This is another one that I know is going to be problematic. I am going to go ahead and just change this now so it's out of the way, but this is going to kind of bite me in the ass when I get over to the staging one that I'm bringing in, but I'm ready for it. It's been that kind of day. Okay, sweet. So this is the first one where I get to kind of illustrate this. So using, you can see there's a name prefix here as well. So you can use that or not, but so there's the provider name prefixes, and then there is me as a module author saying, the name variable is a name prefix, right? And so that's what I'm doing here. I got this, I've got this alarm right here, and I'm saying, hey, I want everything to have the same naming convention. What did I do? I want it all to start with the same name, so I'm just going to use this here. And I do this for almost all of my resources, just so they all have consistent namings. Okay, the resource. So this is a reference as well. So this is actually, I'm just going to go ahead and change this to AWS. Was that the SNS topic? Yeah, AWS SNS topic.this.arn is a reference, right? So now I'm starting to build the DAG, right? So right now I've got 7 kind of just resources floating out in the ether being managed by Terraform. Now I'm starting to link them together. I've got this. That one's funny. That actually won't work. Can't reference itself. I'll back that. You can see the way to spit this out. So to spit this out as a policy, kind of referencing itself. So that one actually can't do that because that SNS topic doesn't exist yet for this policy. So the way it got generated, it's a little funky. So we'll probably want to straighten that out. See, it's also got things like my account owner in there. I'm going to want to pull that out as well. So for now, just to get this out of my face, I'll just do the var.name here. But we'll have to do a little bit of finagling so that we can actually do a real reference to this SNS topic on this policy instead of kind of recreating the ARN, which is what happened at the API level. Sweet, another cluster. So I think this is actually going to be a, do you need to specify cluster members here? That'd be interesting. I'll just go ahead and replace this for now. I think I can pull that out. So I think the cluster member also references the RDS cluster. And this is the identifier, sweet. Yeah, there should be like a, okay. I can never remember which way they get created, if the instance is first or if the cluster is first. I'm going to pause. I've changed a lot of those. I'm just going to run this again to make sure I've got no changes. I haven't blown anything up. I'm good. This one's actually can be a reference. So I'll just actually change this one to SNS topic this.arn. Great. The alarm name is just part of a naming convention. So similar to the SNS topic. All right. Okay, so the only one that's left in here, I'll go ahead and do this one at, oh, this is alarm too. Sweet, I'll reference this one. AWS, SNS topic, this.arn. And I'll pause here for a second because I know I said at the top, like, you know, if you're new to Terraform or OpenTofu, like this probably isn't the session for you, but if you're that person and you've stuck around, what I'm talking about with these references is, all of the resource blocks in Terraform and OpenTofu can reference each other and pull information from each other. So rather than having the ARN coded as a string here, I can say, hey, reference that other resource that's producing the SNS topic and pull an attribute from it and use that here instead. So I'm essentially using the outputs of those resources to fill this in. So I think name is done. That's cool. That's sweet. So I'm going to do that diff one more time. I'm going to do that diff one more time. And we should see some interesting stuff. First, the diffs are going to have now all my variable references in it, but there still should be a couple of things that I should be able to pick out from here. So I think the other one that we had was the database name. Cruise back up to the top of this. See, I got availability zones. And so what I'm looking for now is I'm starting to think about like how I'm backing this out into a module is like I can start to see where I've made my generalizations. So I've solved the availability zones problem. So if I want to bring staging in, I bring my staging state over. Let me just do a tree really quick. Actually, let me do this really quick. I'm gonna, so you see I've got this prod directory. I make a staging directory and I can copy that Terraform state directory into that staging directory and then make a staging.tf vars, right? And now as soon as I start to fill in these values, now that we're seeing a variable on the left side and values on the right side, like you can start to see how I'm making this abstraction here, right? And so what will start to happen is it'll either be variable names here, or it's going to be, you know, a reference on the prod side and then a hard-coded string on the left, right? So I see that I did miss one here. I'll go ahead and do this here in a second. So the things that are still very much like hard-coded strings and whatnot are more variables I need to bring out. So now what I'll do is instead of kind of doing one at a time, I'm just going to make variables for all the things that I see that are different so we can kind of move through these a little bit quicker. So I'll do variable master username. That's what AWS calls it. I'm sorry. There will be preferred backup window. I actually want to see something really quick. I want to see where we're setting these backup windows at. This is on the RDS cluster instance. Okay. Cluster and the cluster instance. They set them both different for now. Now, the thing that's going to be interesting is when we really build out this module, we'll probably want to do some sort of auto scaling on the instance so it can scale up and down. We might even have like a minimum number of replicas, right, that we want to make. So there could realistically be a for each block at the top of this. I don't want to ask people for the backup window for every single one of these things, or the maintenance window for every single one of these things. This is one of these things where it's like, I would like to, when you think about this, it's like, right, like this is one of the things I think I want to make a module. And we're not going to go into this in like hardcore because it's going to be writing a lot of locals. But if I have 5 replicas and I need to set a backup window for all 5 of them, and a maintenance window for all 5 of them, right? Like that's a big onus on the end user of this module to think through, hey, what are the 5 backup windows you want for your Postgres database, right? Or the maintenance windows. And, the average person's thinking, I don't want a maintenance window, I don't want downtime, right? Like, so what I like to do is like present them with some sort of alternative, like, hey, like what is like an acceptable, like lower usability time, right? And that might be Thursday nights, right? And instead of making them kind of pedantically put in the maintenance window, Thursday, this time in minutes through Thursday, this time in other minutes for 5 different instances, calculate it for them. Say, hey, you said it's Thursday night between 10 and midnight. Great. I will make sure that every single one of your replicas has a different maintenance window so that you always have, N-1 replicas available, right? Because like that's where us as operations engineers really get to build product, right? We can think about like how we want our availability rather than saying like, hey, fine tune everything yourselves and figure it out. Like it's a lot to kind of think through. And honestly, the amount of people that I see just pop in the same number and then whoops, they've gotten themselves in a problem is quite a few. So I'm going to make, just for simplicity here, I'm going to make a single backup window and a single maintenance window variable. I'm going to use them both to set both of these. So what I know when I do this is I'm actually going to see my first change show up for prod. And I'm going to be okay with that for this example here. And I might even be okay with that in a real production scenario. But I think ideally what I would be aiming for is can I give them a nice variable interface for them to tell me about their requirements for their database, and I'll figure out the exact minutes of the maintenance window. The thing that I really like about this, and me and my co-founders talk about it a lot on LinkedIn and whatnot, is it's not just creating a layer of abstraction for somebody and hiding the details. It's allowing them to document how they want to use the thing, right? It's letting them document their requirements, doing things like saying, hey, what is your maintenance window? Like what day? Thursday. Great. Like give me 2 hours. What is a 2-hour window? 2-hour window start time, right? 10 p.m. or 22 or whatever, if you're in Europe, right? Like I've lowered the cognitive load on you. And if I say, okay, I know that it takes 30 minutes for this to happen, and you have 8 replicas right now, well, there's going to be more than one down at a time. Right? You don't have to think about it. And I can do the math in that easily in some locals. There's my dog. She agrees. That's what I really like about doing really good Terraform module design is you can get to the point where the interface to that is documentation about the requirements that developer needs rather than them being pedantic about what is a 30-minute block that they need for replica 2 to have some maintenance time. There's no value in that. There's no value in the effort of thinking through it, and there's no value in looking at it later. So, but for now, we'll just make it one. We'll see some disparity get introduced. I'll apply it just so as we run things from here on out, we don't see a change, and we can kind of track our more important changes that we don't want to see happen. So I'll make one for now. We'll set a variable to set both of them, and then we'll apply, and then we'll continue working through this. So we'll do variable. Backup window. And that is also a string. And then I'll make a maintenance window as well. Right. The difference being, I can't ever spell maintenance right. Tenants. The difference being like one's going to be the backup window. It's still going to be available. It's just going to probably have slower response time. The maintenance window is when, vacuums might happen in Postgres, or, the instance might actually go down, right? So you don't want those to necessarily overlap. And I don't know if AWS will necessarily let them overlap. I can't recall. We'll make 2 of those. So we'll have the username, these 2 instances. The tags are also something we're just going to go ahead and pull out right now. And what I like to do is say, instead of just saying tags, I'll usually say additional tags, because again, like me as the person that's authoring this module, maybe I'm the DBA at our company, right? I know Terraform, I'm a database administrator. I know more than anybody at this company about running Postgres, right? What I want to do is I want to be kind of encoding my expertise into this so that not everybody has to become a Postgres expert to use Postgres, right? I don't have to be a mechanic to drive my car. And so one of the things I like to do here is like, I will make my own tags that I want on here. There might be organization-wide tags. There might be cost and billing tags. There might be maintenance tags that I want to put on this just so it's easy for me as a DBA to find and troubleshoot things later. And then there may be tags that's up to a team, right? So I always say additional tags to make it obvious that there's going to be a base set of tags that is going to be merged with this. And whatever tags are inside that database, inside that module, I tend to like to make those the ones that merge over, right? So we'll take those additional tags and then we'll merge our concrete tags that are inside the module on top of those. So we'll pull the modules, or we'll pull these tags out as well. And then I'm gonna have to look at this availability zone. I'm curious what this other availability zone is. This might be the exact availability zone of a specific instance. And I think the cluster sets an array, a list of strings to set all the availability zones it can disperse in or be distributed in. Var name, that's great. Instance class, this is an interesting one, right? So we'll have to look at that auto scaling thing as well that we had over there, but instance class is going to be another one that we're pulling out here. So instance class is another one that's interesting. Like, even looking at this, like db.serverless, db T3 medium. Does anybody know how much RAM and how much CPU is in a T3 medium off the top of your heads without Googling? Type it in real quick. Anybody know? Nobody knows. So this is another one that, like, Michael, did you Google that? Michael's being a smart ass. Joe's just copying Michael. But this is another one where, like, this is interesting. There's like DB serverless or DB T3 medium. Like, we may want to put some constraints on this here, like what instances we let people make, or, maybe you want to abstract that away from them too, right? Like, one of the things I'm looking for as somebody who does have a lot of database experiences, like, I don't necessarily want people to pick the instance type. I want them to tell me about their requirements. I want to hear things like, what is the growth rate of their database? How much data do they have today? Right. And like, I can use that to figure out the right instance types for them. Right. So like speaking their language, making the module available at their language, and then encoding my expertise into it. But for now, just for simplicity's sake, we'll just do the instance class. But there's a little bit of disparity here between DB serverless and T3 medium is going to create some additional interesting variables that we're gonna have to think about. So in serverless, there's two or three additional attributes in Aurora that you need to set. There's these things called ACUs. And I think they're not showing up in here because they happen to be defaulted to the same values in prod and staging. So we're not seeing a diff between them, but we'll need to expose those as well, specifically for the DB serverless side. And so what's interesting here is, like, we've gotten to a variable that will be dependent on the value of another variable, right? So ACUs will only apply if it is db.serverless, not if it's a DB anything else. So that is one thing I know we will have to do in this as well. But for now, we're just going to do instance class as that last little variable there. And I think that's about it. Between the tags, the name is fine. That's just going to be variabilized. Again, I'm looking for, like, what have I started to generalize here? What hasn't been over here? These look good. Reference is good. That's going to straighten out here in a second. There's nothing else here that I see that we need to expose as a variable to get these real close to parity. And there's this goofy thing with the policy I'm still going to have to fix. That looks like about it. There was that one last thing, which was the subnet. Where was it? Yeah, security group IDs. equals a list of string. And what was this? This is a map. I can't remember if you can define map without setting the type inside of it, but I'll just say string. Okay, so we have these additional variables. So I'm going to go ahead and punch these all in. We are going to see one churn, which is the backup windows. Actually, I think we'll see two changes. We'll see a change on the cluster and a change on the cluster instance when we do this. But I'm going to go through and I'm going to replace these with variables and set up the TF vars for them as I do it. And then once this is done, it's pretty likely that we'll be able to just bring over the staging state and make a staging TF vars, and we'll have a module that kind of can work for either one of these environments. So let's go through these one at a time. So the first one is we already did the name, we did the availability zones, we do master username next. Master username, there we go. And we'll do master. Thanks, autocomplete. Okie doke. So we should be able to do some plans here. Let's do that as we go through. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I know. So we'll do a backup window. Backup window. And again, this is the one that's going to introduce our first bit of churn right here. Backup window. I'm going to take these other ones out so we can get a clean plan running without prompting me for inputs. So we'll do var backup window. Backup window, and we'll do var backup window. So this is the first time we're actually going to see it's going to want to introduce two changes. The maintenance window. Oh, wait, were those the same? Were the backup window and the, hold on, were they already the same? No way. Were they the same between those two? Maybe they were already the same. $12.54. Oh, they were the same. Cool. I was worrying about nothing. I thought they were set to two different things. Sweet. Okay, so then we'll do the maintenance window. Didn't introduce a change. Is the maintenance window the same? All right, maintenance window, save that, add a maintenance window, 8 autocomplete. These two are different. I think this is where we'll see. There we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply this. It's not a big deal. Now, if this was your production environment, something to think about. Is it fine to change the maintenance window? It might sync with the team, make sure it's cool. Or start to kind of back out some logic for devising a maintenance window schedule based off of the day of the week and like some sort of in number of hours start time where they're able to have some sort of like lower availability. But we'll just apply it for now. Yes. Fun. Invalid database cluster identifier. Database cluster identifier. var.name. I'm not going to stage one really quick. Cluster identifier. Okie dokie. So that's interesting. Cluster identifier. Quest ID. Cluster identifier. Okay, this is always fun. I'm going to take a peek at the state. I wonder if there was. I'm going to take a peek at the state really quick. So cat and here, I want to say prod. Ooh, actually, let me look at that error one more time. I didn't know if it was on if the cluster, invalid cluster was on the cluster or on the cluster instance. All right, modifying DB cluster response 400. Okay, cool. Okay, I want to see what's in here. Cluster identifier here is also prod database v1. That's interesting. That is interesting. Let me just yank this null out here. I didn't know, I didn't catch that was there. Make sure that's not. That is the full cluster ARN. Obtaining RDS cluster invalid. Okay, look at the state one more time. It's the fun part, everybody. All right, cluster member, great. Invalid cluster identifier. Here's that underlying resource ID. So this is one of the things that comes back when I showed the spreadsheet earlier. I said that there was those IDs that were coming back. They're funky. So this is the actual resource ID that was coming back there. But my cluster identifier, Let me think here. I wonder if does a suffix get generated? I'm wondering if I used a prefix on this one, and that might be my problem, is that I remember there was something I said earlier where I was like, oh, it's going to pinch me in a bit. I think this is the pinch. I'm going to just try something real funky real quick. Dude, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, so the cluster, that's really interesting. So I don't want to do this. This would take down data in prod. Not something we want to do. That add and or destroy and replace. So it's not that. I'm going to just try one more thing here real quick. What's interesting is it's able to make the API call. It's pulling the information. It's realizing there's okay. That's interesting. Maybe closer to this refreshing state. Let's take a gander at something really quick. I wonder if there's something in. There's a bunch of variables here that are kind of auto written in from the API response. I'm curious if there's anything here that is messing me up. Because that is the actual identifier for the cluster. Engine mode. And that is on the cluster, not on the instance. Okay. Interesting. I might hard code that second maintenance window just so we can finish going through this and then see if I can hop in the console to see if maybe there's some sort of, I don't know, some sort of weird character, or maybe there's something missing there. I'm very, very interested in what's going on here because I'm able to import it by that ID, but it's very bizarre that it's saying it's not a valid ID for update. And it's building the actual ARN, which is pretty interesting. I'm going to log into the console off screen so I can bring this guy up and take a gander at it. 1 second here. Okay. Do a little one-time password. Okay, sweet. There we go. Okie dokie. I'll try to track this down. Got a lot of DB instances in here. Okay, so here we are. It's the regional cluster. That is certainly the ID. That is certainly the ID. The ID of the cluster. This is the instance ID. 204. 2, right? Cluster members, great. Cluster member. Yeah, and this is the ID for it. That's a fun time. I'm going to do something real quick just for fun. I'm going to just go ahead and hard code this back in here just to make sure that I'm not losing my mind. Invalid database cluster identifier. Builds the ARN out. Okay, let's pop this back in here real quick. That is the ARN. Okay, I'm going to switch back that maintenance thing. I'm curious if there's something else here. Wasn't the cluster identifier prefix. Curious if there's something else here that is like munging. That is so bizarre. Invalid parameter value, RDS cluster identifier. It's very bizarre that it's not. There's got to be something, one of these attributes that was auto-populated. It must be blowing this up. So before I go ahead and do that, before I kind of rip out a bunch of these things to see if I can figure out what it is, I'm just going to go ahead and hard code that maintenance so we can go through the rest of the variables, and then we'll come back to this. We have the exact same problem in the staging data and the staging one. So let's figure out what that is. So I'm going to kind of move through the rest of these. I'll hard code that second maintenance in there. We'll continue to see a diff between those two. When we bring staging over, staging will have one plan to apply, which will be its hard-coded maintenance window that we're going to leave in place so that we can move past this. And then when we get to that, we'll try to figure out what exactly it is about this identifier that's off of it. Maybe an AWS provider bug. Hey, you know what? I actually have not set my providers. That's a good idea. I should probably go ahead and just do my providers really quick. Let me go ahead and grab a config real quick. Yeah, it's funny is I don't know what provider I'm on right now. Yeah, fun times, huh? So I'll do this. Oh, whoops, in the wrong window. Okay, so let's go ahead and do. Okie dokie. So add a provider in here. I know that the source, this shouldn't be, I hope this isn't it. I know that the source provider was a 4 something. So I'm just going to set it to 4, even though I think technically we're on the 5 right now. But I'm just going to set it back to an older version because I know it worked there. So going to go ahead and tofu reinit. Ooh, okay. So that's fun. Okay, this is interesting. So there's a lot of attributes that were generated when we did this that it is a lot of attributes that it's complaining about. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to pin this to 5 just for fun. Let's see what the current major or the current minor version is. I'm going to go back 1 minor. I think the current is like 5.8. Where's that at? Yeah, 5.8.1. I'm going to see what the latest patch level of 5.8.0 was. Ooh, 5.8.1 is a freshie. 5.8.1 is a freshie. Oh, .0. Is it all just .0? That's easy. Okay, let's try that. Let's just probably bop them back 1. Ah. A little tilde. Not tilde squiggly. Not called tilde. Put me back to 5.8.1 and do 5.8.0 specifically. Pin inversions. Lesson learned. Well, maybe. We'll see if that's it. All right, I'm going to try 4 real quick. And if it's not 4, then we'll go back to just hard coding that maintenance value for now. Okay. Okay, so certificate identifier is not expected here. So let's go ahead and I really hope we don't rip all this stuff out and then it's not that, because this is going to create a hellacious diff. I'm going to keep it on 5. The reason why is this other module, man, I really hope it's because I've already created these main TFs and I've got a really good diff flow right now where I've kind of narrowed it down. That's going to give me an idea of like if I can bring the staging one over into this. So I don't want to remove all of these attributes because it's going to make that diff super messy. So I'm just going to stick to 5.8.7 or whatever it was here. I'm going to hard code that maintenance and then we'll come back to this when we have one code base. It'll be much easier to clean it up since I won't have a big diff between the two of them. So let's go ahead and switch this back to 5.8.1. I'll tell you that for anybody who's doing this in the future. Okay, and then while that runs, we'll go ahead and revert that maintenance tag, that maintenance value to what it was previously. The preferred maintenance window of the RDS cluster. Right here, I think that was it. Great, no changes. So we've hard coded this one. We're not using that variable. We are using it for the other maintenance window on the instance. we will get caught in a potential change here in our plan when we bring staging over. We'll leave this one for now so we can kind of work through the rest of this real quick. So we'll do instance class, just because this one's going to be pretty straightforward. Throw this up here, and I believe it was DB serverless for this one. And then we'll do the instance class. There we go. Instance class. Great. So that should be no changes as well. Security group IDs. I believe this is in just one place here. Yeah, there we go. So we'll go back and do the tags. And so we're going to do the tags in a minute. And the reason why is it's going to create a pretty big diff between the two when I diff them again. And I just want to come back to that one last. So I'll go ahead and where am I at? Okay, so diff main and TF, and then staging main and TF. Now these should look pretty templated out at this point. So I can see when I bring, so if I make a staging.tf var, so I'm going to set that. Cluster member, cluster identifier. Great. That'll be good. KMS key reference. Actually, I'll just go ahead and fix that now. KMS key. There we go. KMS key. That is the ARN. Is that supposed to be the ARN, or is it supposed to be the key ID? Love it. Love me a good inconsistency. We'll just call it the ARN for now. I think that's right. We'll see eventually. That's the other great part between some things taking ARN, some things taking IDs, some things taking names, is when they call it an ID, but they actually take an ARN. Whoo! Drives me crazy. Okay, so sweet. I don't see anything else over here that makes me not comfortable with starting to bring that staging environment into this. I'm gonna just clear this and run it one more time. It's a bit messy looking. And so what I'm looking for here is, besides the tags, which I know are just going to be messy in general, is there a variable for every hard-coded value on the staging side? So availability zones, yes. This is a little messy because I took out this identifier prefix on the production one. But members is variabilized, name is variabilized. Variabilized, that's a reference that'll go away. Variabilized. That is variabilized. That's great. This maintenance window is going to be the thing that's going to cause an attempted change on the staging, which is the same change we would have been introducing to prod, which we do want to see now because I want to figure out what this cluster identifier thing is. All tag stuff, that'll be solved. This is already solved by an input variable. Availability zone for this specific instance is one more that we need to get. And I don't like this one, kind of going back to that same availability zone thing I said at the top of, like, I don't like people having to think through it. But now effectively, the way this module is kind of shaking out right now is you will not only need to tell me the availability zones of the cluster, but you need to tell me the availability zone of each individual instance. That sucks. Now you have to think about this twice, right? What happens if you put an availability zone for the instance? It's not in the list of the ones the cluster is allowed to be in. Right? So I'll take this as a variable now, but what I would probably do, like after we get these in sync, is go through and do some state surgery to make that like a random selection, and not truly random at the first like declarative apply. Pick that value, cache it, and then assign it to it, so we can kind of disperse it across all the zones without the end user having to think through this. Because in reality, like, this is an Aurora cluster. I want the replicas to scale up and down all day. I want it to pick random zones for it to be in. And this might even be, I can't recall, the cluster instance resource may even let you omit the zone. which is something I have to look into. If you can omit the zone, I won't make it a variable at all. I feel like the RDS cluster picks the zone from the list of zones it has available, but I just can't recall. So I'll expose it as a variable for now, but we might be able to look at the drop it, which would be fantastic. Availability, yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Okay, so then we got tags, and that's about it. So now what I'm going to do is, I feel pretty good about this. I got the tags that I want to back out. And so what I'm going to do for the tags is something that's going to create a pretty rough diff, but it is what it is. I think we're past the point of needing diff now. So we'll bring in this state file. We'll bring in a staging.tf vars. And then when we plan the TF vars, we'll just have to watch for changes that we're not expecting, where there's just like a hard-coded value from the production side that's kind of bleeding in there. So the reason I do the tags last is the tags is actually going to change this main TF file pretty significantly. So what we'll do is, a couple of ways of doing this. We're not going to set a bunch of hard-coded tags in here like I normally would, just because it kind of diverges from just reversing the Terraform. And you may not agree with that decision. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here to the provider tags, and I'm going to set the defaults. Okay, that's a choice. I'm going to set the defaults to additional tags. Now, again, I would probably, right above this, I'd probably do a local. I'd probably generate some tags for the team based off of like what I know about their inputs, right? Maybe they gave me an environment. Maybe they told me something about their reliability. I generate some tags. Maybe I take a team name and I use that to look up databases and team name, and I look that up in, one of our CMSs to figure out what the cost center is, right? So people don't have to pop in cost center number. So I kind of like doing a lot of that stuff for people, but we won't do that now. We'll just route it in here. And so what that means is those tags are going to come in right here. So I'm going to go and set the tags in my prod.tf vars, but there's a lot of like tag churn over and over and over and over and over again in here. And you'll see that there is this one actually package name. Actually, we'll do it right here. We'll go ahead and do this. Locals. Oh yeah, I forgot that there was this one tag that is based off of an attribute that's coming in. Do base tags equals MD package var.name. And then it's merge additional tags local.base tags. Right, the right side. Yes, I want mine to override it. I don't want anybody else to set MD package. This is us saying like, hey, these are organizational standards. This is a tag that we always set. Right, like I don't want you to override the package name. The package name should always be the name of your, the package you're deploying or whatever, right? Sorry, these tags are coming from a module in Master. So some of these are very specific to how our platform works. So pardon the name if you're not familiar with it. We might also do something so people don't have to do the manage by. I'm just going to manage by master driver as well. This is where you might set OpenTofu or Terraform or Atlantis for whatever tool that you're using. But I'm just going to go ahead and hard code that now to master driver. So now what's going to happen is a couple of things. So one, I'm going to remove all of these tag blocks from all of these resources. They're all over the place. And I'll add an additional tags to prod.tf vars, and I'll just set the remaining resources. And so let's go ahead and do that. Yoink this out, pull this out. Wait, did we ever hard code that window before I make all these changes? I can't remember. Tofu. We did hard code that. Yeah, we did. Okay, I just want to make sure we hard coded that maintenance value. So additional tags. And that one is going to get set by the module. That one's going to get set by the module. Honestly, like, this one right here would probably get set by the module too. I'll bring that one back up. Right. So this is me saying like, hey, like, so there's just some terms that are from our platform. I'll explain them really quick. I wouldn't suggest the same ones unless you're using our platform. So we have this concept of projects, of these bigger, containers that essentially let you do blueprints. So this is like my reverse engineering Terraform project. We have targets, or essentially environments. We have what we call a manifest, which is essentially it is a name for the Terraform module. Like we're calling this one Aurora Postgres. Like this one is the instance of this. So the idea is that in MassDriver, it's a canvas. So you diagram your Terraform modules instead of adding them to like Snowflake main TF files all over the place. And so you can have two of the same module on a canvas, and they have essentially a context, and that's what this manifest is. So really good example is, let's say I'm deploying Redis. I might have a Redis cluster for sessions, and I might have a Redis cluster for page cache. So the manifest would be sessions and page cache. So it's just kind of like, what is the name of like this particular invocation of this thing? And then the package name is all that information kind of put together. So I'm just going to hard code these like this for now. But this would be your own like non-negotiables around tags that you want to put in here. So flip back over here really quick. So I'm essentially saying my project in my environment. My project is WKECR, environment is prod. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and gut all these tags from in here. So I'm just going to search for tags. At this point in time, I'm going to have a pretty rough diff. So diffing is kind of done from this point on. But I think we can bring over that staging stuff now and start to collapse this into a single module, which is exciting. Ooh, these subnet IDs, I didn't catch that. We're going to have to address that. And so what's going to happen is we bring that staging over. You're going to see staging try to recreate the subnet group, I bet, because it's going to be getting the prod subnets. So we'll have to back those out to I'll have to back those out to a variable as well, but we'll do that in a minute. More tags, more tags, more tags, more tags. Cool, that's all of them. So I should have no changes on prod, I hope. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Ooh, that's not good. Changing them all to null. Changing them all to null. That's not fun. Let me just try something real quick. Null is very weird. Is merge not the right one? Merge takes arbitrary number of maps or objects, which is a single map or object that contains a merge subset from all arguments. How are they going to null, bro? Oh, I know what it is. That's interesting the way that kind of plays out. So I'm removing those tags, but there's still tags all under the hood. Yeah. So the provider, so I see what's happening. So it's going to remove the tags as far as the state file is concerned, but the AWS provider has this default tags that it'll write back on. So I think I'm actually fine with this. So it's going to drop all those tags. Those tags should still be applied. So I'll go ahead and do this, and I'm going to verify it in the UI afterwards. But let's go ahead and just rock and roll. And then we'll just pop back over here to this guy. I don't know why that screen does not take the change the first time. So this tag should still be on this guy after that apply. There they are. Nice. So they're all still on there. Great. So it looked like a change, but it was essentially a change to the way the state was thinking about it. Because if you look in the state file, we look at this in the staging one, those tags are all hard-coded on the resources in the state, despite the fact that the AWS provider is going to apply them like during application. So if I go and cat up to staging, you can see all the tags and tags all. So essentially we're removing the tags, and then there's this tags all, which is going to be handled by the default tags here that's still applying those, which is cool. So sweet. So now what we can do is we have a module that's like fairly generalized. Now there's definitely some problems in it. There's definitely some problems we're going to need to address. But now what I can do is I can make a new workspace here for staging. I can bring my Terraform state over. I can switch to that staging workspace and then make a staging.tf vars and kind of populate that based off of the hard-coded values in that other module. And what I should see is I'll get to the point where you'll start to see there's some churn it's trying to introduce just because of the few places where we have some issues. But we'll work through most of that, and then we'll have a pretty generalized module, and then we can just back out a few more variables to catch things like that, the DB subnets. But I'll leave that as is now, just so we can kind of see the effect of that when it comes back around. Okie doke. So tofu, let me look for questions. Also wondering if an output of the real cluster name. Cluster identifier. That's a good, let me test that one, Joe. Let me throw that up on screen. Still trying to figure out what this was. So his idea was put the AWS RDS cluster, this dot cluster identifier here. How do you feel about that? I feel like I'm going mad. I feel like that's the same string, but maybe there's some like weird encoding. Maybe it's not a D. Maybe it's like a thing that looks like a D. I don't know, but we'll leave this output here now. We won't do some outputs anymore. I know, right? This is the joy of the cloud, right? Is banging your head against something until your head cracks open or it works. So we're going to pull in that state file. We'll do a tofu workspace, new staging. So this is always the part. I got muscle memory. I've been going back through my bash history. There's a 25% chance I accidentally apply the prod TF vars to the staging workspace. So let's hope I don't do that. And then what we'll do is we can do a tree here now. You can see that I've got staging's empty. So I'm going to just move that Terraform state from staging into there. And then we'll kind of hash through the TF vars for staging really quick. All right, tofu plan var file staging. Hey, got to enter a bunch of stuff. Okay, so now we got this staging TF vars file that we have here, and then we have all the values that we need to back out from this hard-coded one over here. So I'm gonna make this a little smaller, and we'll kind of fill this out. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with the prod ones, scary, and then I'm just gonna kind of nuke all the values just so I don't blow myself up. This one's the same, except for that. Okay, so I'll come through here and I'll grab the availability zones, bingo, grab the name, bongo, grab the master username, prepare docs, backup window. Let me see if this one's backup windows are the same. They are, nice. Maintenance window. So I'm going to check main to make sure I copy the right maintenance window. I can't remember which one we used as the variable and which one we left hard coded. So I'm just going to check that really quick. Maintenance window. The cluster instance is the variable. We left the other one hard coded. So I'm going to grab the cluster instance maintenance window from this side, which is this guy here. Great. Instance class. I remember this was a DB T3 micro, which apparently has 8 gigs of RAM. Everybody's got them all memorized. Okay. What about a DB RD6.x extra large? Anybody got that one? Or R6G? Anybody got that one off the top of their head? Joe, I hope it is a provider bug. Otherwise, you and I are going insane. Those are the two options. We've absolutely lost our minds here, or it's a provider bug. So we'll see here. But it's just so weird that it happened at, it didn't happen at 4. That's right. We couldn't do it because there was a bunch of attributes that aren't present in the 4 provider. Okay, sweet. So security group IDs. That's the last one to grab here. So go ahead and grab this. Security group IDs. Now, I know that we're going to see churn on the subnets because we didn't do that. So we should see that here. But now I'll be interested in what this plan looks like. So it should be relatively clean. There might be a few things that it's trying to do the maintenance window and the DB subnets that we need to go back and fix. So let's just go to plan. I mean, it wants to destroy a bunch of stuff. It wants to do a lot of things. So this is one of the other ones is remember the suffixes. I kind of called that one out, the suffixes. So we don't want to, there's two ways we can solve this. This sucks because I used a module to make this like base case to test. This probably won't happen for you unless you're kind of in the same scenario, which would be weird. I don't want to make the name though have this big extra thing on it. So we'll have to probably do some state surgery there. And what we'll end up doing is we'll switch it to using the prefix, and then Terraform's going to want to create the suffix, and we'll go in and we'll hard code the suffix to what we know the suffixes are. So that'll solve that one. The SNS topic is tags. Don't care. Oof, man, this one's rough. So, this one's moving the availability zones. That's one other thing that we have to catch is the availability zones, right? This is another one with the ID. This is tagged. And the members. The member is another one that was hard coded from the prefix. Let me just look at something really quick. Cluster identifier. Actually, I think that's one that we can just, you know what? I think that's one of those. I may know what the problem is. Okay, so there's not much here. So it's a bunch of tag stuff, and then there's a couple of things we need: the suffixes, and then the maintenance window, and then there's one other thing I'm seeing here, which is let me just peek I want to peek the state to see if the availability zones are in the state. Because if they are, then I think I can actually take this off, and my assumption will be, sorry, I just peeked. I cheated. I peeked over at the code really quick, and I definitely do not manually set the availability zones on the instance. So I think I'm remembering that RDS will pick the availability zones of the cluster when it makes an instance. You don't have to actually specify them. So I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to switch back to prod, since staging has a little bit of mess because some of the hard-coded values that are still in there from prod. I'm going to switch back to prod really quick, and I'm going to make a couple of changes to the code that I think is going to get me a cleaner staging plan. Tofu workspace, prod. Now I got to remember to use the prod TF. Okay, so let's do tofu plan, var file, prod TF bars, just to make sure I'm in a good spot. Bingo. I like that. So I'm going to test two things really quick. So one, I'm pretty sure we set the cluster identifier here. I wonder if this is my problem. I wonder if this is the problem. Let me organize this in the DAG. So one thing I know that's definitely true is this cluster identifier can take a reference. So you can do something RDS cluster this dot ID. And this should still be cool. No, it's not cool. What is it changing? Oh, it's changing the... Can it take either? Let me look what the cluster identifier actually takes. I can't remember if it takes the ID, which is like the last portion, or if it takes an ARN. Cluster identifier. That is the ARN. Okay. Okay. I think it may be a provider bug. This is interesting because it generated the code using the wrong thing. So we just saw that the default ID coming out of, we can kind of visualize this here. Let me change this back really quick. Man, I'll have to, next time I do this, I'm going to have to remember to use a version that I actually have installed on my machine, not grabbing old latest. So let's take a gander here. I'm going to open these outputs back again. So this was the cluster identifier. Just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and do the cluster ID as well. I'm going to tofu plan this one more time. Okay. So if you look at the Terraform docs, what they're saying is, why does it do that every time? You see that on the instance, it sets the cluster identifier to being the cluster's ID. Now, what was interesting was, if you remember the code that was generated here, right, we were able to come in and throw in just the name. Remember, we were going through and we did that exact string match and replaced it. So this was just the name of the instance, which is what the Terraform, so complicated. So the Terraform provider refers to as the cluster identifier, right? So that's interesting that when we put the right thing here. So yeah, it looks like the provider generated the wrong thing here. So it used the cluster identifier instead of the ID, which is interesting. So we need to fix the state there. Man, this was supposed to be a workshop on reverse engineering some cloud resource. Turns out it's a workshop on debugging provider error, maybe. And this provider did come out last week, so wouldn't be surprised by that. But the code that was generated is definitely not correct here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up these state files, and I'm going to manually change it. I'm going to plan it in prod. This should be golden there, and then I'll apply it, and it should have no change. I think it's just I think the state file is a little borked right now. So what I'm going to do is throw a little comment here. AWS RDS cluster this dot ID, despite it being the ARN. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this prod directory here, and I'll rename this. I'll actually just root this up there in a second. I'll open up this state file. I'm going to prettify this. Pretty? Do I have prettier format? Cool. Manually mode JSON. Cool. Do this. Cat Terraform prods state file JQ. There we go. Format it myself. I'll format it myself. Okay, so what we want to do is I'm going to get rid of this staging over here. Just going to make a little room. For outputs, we're fine with them. Move this over a little bit. So what we want to do is find the cluster instance. I'm going to change this from what is the name, the final portion, to the actual ARN, because it looks like that's what the resource actually accepts. And I'm going to update the state here to address that. So cluster identifier, here we go. So what I'm actually going to put in there is the clusters ARN, AWS RDS cluster ARN, bingo, this guy. Instance cluster identifier. Okay. So I've got that set as a reference now. This is going to let us fix one other thing. If this is what I think it is, it's going to let us fix one other thing that's going to cause some heartache. Okay. Why does it want to replace it? Cluster identifier. Did I change the wrong state file? Change the wrong state file. Get you out of here. AWS cluster instance, cluster identifier. Will it take either? Will it take either? I'm actually curious if the API will take the ID or the ARN. That's interesting. The reason I'm trying to do this is I'm trying to organize the DAG here. I'm trying to put the cluster instances. So it makes the cluster and then makes the cluster instances afterwards via the ref. And right now it's kind of linked together by this variable name, which I'm not a big fan of. Which I'm not a big fan of, but it's interesting that it's trying to force a replacement by putting the value that is absolutely the value you're supposed to use. Let me just look at this one more time. I'm not putting in the name. Really don't want to destroy this instance. I kind of want to apply it just to see what happens real quick. Kind of want to apply it, see what happens really quick. So yeah, let me look in the cloud one more time. So cluster identifier of this instance. Let's go down here. I want to see what it has set as its subnet group, networking, DB instance ID. Where's the cluster? Cluster parameter group, that's what I'm looking for. Interesting. Let me see if I can do it one more other way. I'm gonna try one more thing. Since apparently we'll accept this. I'm looking at my outputs one more time. Cluster identifier, let's try that. Let's just do a cluster identifier here. The doc said it was ID, but I'm gonna throw identifier here. My gut is maybe it accepts both. Maybe the API accepts both. But the Terraform docs definitely say that it is the resource.id field, not cluster identifier. But I got a clean plan here. Now, who knows if this doesn't apply when we get around to applying it, then we might have the same issue we have with the cluster identifier on the cluster, which we'll have to look at. But what's cool now is this is at least organized in a DAG, right? The cluster. So this is now dependent on the cluster, which is interesting because when I was looking at the cluster earlier, I noticed that there was a cluster members, which I definitely have not set before because I would have thought that's weird. I think this is just an option or an API result. So I'm going to guess that we can pull that out and that won't force. I hope that doesn't force because that's one of the things that's a bit weird, right? It's like there's the cluster, then it gets created, cluster instance gets created, cluster instance references the cluster. How does the cluster also have an array reference to the instances? That's cyclical, right? So that's not what we do in Terraform. So I'm hoping I can just yank that. Bingo, and I can. Sweet. So that's what I was hoping for. So we got something. Let me just go ahead and tofu apply just for shits and giggles. See, the other day, I was telling the team, I was like, we got to figure out what to do for the workshop. I was like, I went through a dry run of it. Funny, last week I got to look at when this provider came out, and I was like, it only took me about 2 hours to like go through the whole thing. I was like, maybe we'll just do a second module for the second 2 hours. It turns out we'll just deal with some weird provider bugs. That's true cloud computing right there, is running into extremely weird API shit while you're in the middle of something important. It's the job. But anyways, we got this applying. That's great. I want to flip back over to staging now and kind of work through that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tofu workspace select staging. I'm going to plan one time just so I get that var file in my bash history so I don't put the wrong one. Okay, sweet. So what do we got here? So look through these changes one more time. So there's a hard-coded suffix here that we still need to address. The tags I don't care about. Tags I don't care about. Hard-coded suffix here that we need to address, the availability zone. So actually, I'm going to switch back one more time to prod. I'm going to pull that availability zone out of prod to see if it affects the plan. Tofu workspace select prod, tofu plan var file, prod the TFRs. Let's yoink that availability zone out from here. I think it should not care about that. Bingo. So that's one less thing that we have to worry about now in the churn for staging. So I guarantee I don't know if I guarantee it. And if I do, I don't know what the guarantee is. But let's go ahead and look at staging's TF state really quick. my gut is we'll have the availability zone right there in the state. So my gut is the way it works with the API is you create the resource, because I definitely didn't set this on the resource when I created it. I say I want a cluster instance. The cluster knows where it's allowed to be, and it's distributing them and giving me that back. So that feels good. That's in there. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to staging one more time. Rerun this, and there should be just a little bit less. Oh shit! Knew I was going to do it. I said 25% chance. Was that the fourth time that I've run this? Did I hit it? Okay, so now we got tags, don't care, tags, don't care, tags, don't care, tags, don't care. Cluster instance still has some like volatility here. The maintenance window, but we knew that was going to be a problem. And I don't care about that either. Actually, we'll do a little fun. Yeah, so I think I'm actually just gonna apply this one. So that hard-coded maintenance window that's still in it, we still need to kind of figure out whether we're gonna do a variable for it or we're gonna do some calculations for it. But what I wanna do is I just wanna make a single variable for it. So I'm gonna go ahead and set that variable. So there's just one maintenance window to make this easy, and we don't have to do some crazy locals or calculating maintenance windows for people. And then I'm going to target apply the cluster just to swap that and get that churn out of the way. And then we'll do the same thing for staging. Or was it staging already? This is staging. So we'll get them both on the same maintenance window that's based off that maintenance window var. And then we can kind of work through the last bit here. So it looks like that last bit is, I think, just these suffixes from me using the yeah, that's it. Just the suffixes from using name prefix when I made these originally. So I'm going to go ahead and target apply this and change that maintenance window. So we'll do is var.maintenance window here. Do plan one more time. So you can see that it wants to change this, enable global write forwarding. There's some some of the things I like to remove. Sorry, just a little side tangent here. Like, this is one of the reasons I don't like having like some people love to put every single attribute in here, but like, not sure if you're familiar with like global write forwarding and local write forwarding, but there's like a fair amount of attributes, particularly when you're in RDS, that don't apply to certain engines, Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, etc. Right? And so I don't know if they've added global endpoints to Postgres recently. I honestly haven't stayed on top of it. But I know that at one point in time, MySQL was the only one that supported it. So the catch, though, is this isn't a MySQL resource. This is a RDS cluster resource. So there's attributes that just don't matter. And like, to me, that's just noise. It's like, why even have somebody see that and go, oh, I can set that value, when it's like, this just doesn't even apply, right? So I'm going to yank these out because it's setting them to null. And then since it's null, it looks like the provider is actually wanting to set a provider default. So I'm just going to remove them instead, just so we don't see that. I think we just won't see the churn there, which is just nothing. And then if that looks clean, then I'm going to go ahead and apply this. I'll switch to prod. I'll apply the maintenance window there. And then I think the only thing we have left is the tags, which is fine. And then the suffix, which I need to fix. So yeah, it looks like it still wants to do it, but whatever. We'll just roll it. We'll roll it. And then we'll do the same to prod as well. And then we'll fix that last suffix thing. And then we'll essentially have one module that is now driving these two. And so, like, again, MVP, right? Like, we started with nothing. We generated a prod module, generated a staging module. Generally, that diffing process is pretty quick when you're not running into extremely weird shit in the provider. You get down to this one module where you have 2 or 3 of these, and like, that's your MVP. That's not where you stop, right? Like, from there, I'm looking at a couple of things. My first question is, let me hit yes on this. We can let this roll while I'm flapping my gums. Of course, it's the same cluster identifier thing. Very funny. We'll come back we'll do the suffixes and then we'll try to straighten this out. Lost my train of thought there. It's gone. It's gone. Lost my train of thought there. Okay, so we're back on this weird cluster identifier thing. Okay, so yeah, that train of thoughts, the train of thought has left the station. So maybe it'll pop back into my head in a minute. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll try to fix these suffixes so that there's no churn on staging. Oh, I remember what I was saying as your MVP. Yeah, let me come back to that for a second. As soon as I saw staging. So where I go from here is like once we get this suffix fixed is this is an MVP. That we've made a module called Aurora Postgres. We've proven that we can drive 2 environments. We can automate 2 environments. We can have some level of parity. We can introduce the disparity as we please, the naming, maybe the instance types, right? But like, where do you go from here? My next thing would be, do we have any other environments where we have this Postgres instance, right? For a small startup, when we only have one database, maybe we have a QA staging in prod, or maybe we have a shared dev staging in prod, right? What I would do then is I'd kind of do the same thing. I'd go create a net new module for dev. I'd import it. And then I'd kind of walk through the same process of like, okay, like this is what my module code looks like. What do I need to do to modify this module to work for dev, right? I'm kind of backing out these 3 environments, backing out the variable interface. And now what I've got is like a roughing, right? Like I got an idea of how Postgres is going to work for my business. But at this point in time, like, is that variable interface something that is going to be a good, useful developer experience for my devs who might need to spin up 5 to 15 databases, right? Maybe we're taking this IAC thing on because we are starting to tear down a monolith and break it into a couple of different domain-based services. I didn't say microservice, right? And so maybe we need to make a lot more databases. So I'm thinking, okay, well, if I'm the DBA, I'm the person that knows the most about databases. There's 16 people on the team now. Like, we want to make sure that people can move quickly but not step on their own foot. Like, that's the next part. Like, after you kind of get all of the environments like backed into this module to figure out what it looks like, what it feels like, is what is the use case I'm aiming to serve with this module, right? Like, what do I want the variable interface to look like? And that would kind of be what I'd be starting on next, right? So like what we're going to get here in just a second as we fix these suffixes and then figure out whatever this bizarreness is here, which I think I'm going to switch back to the 4.0 provider and now gut all of these additional attributes that are set here that I know I don't need to see if that fixes it. You know, consider this like, hey, I got this done. I've got us in a good place, but now it's about figuring out what the right developer experience is for my team. And that might be exposed to every single resource. It might be exposing a nice abstraction. Good debate happening on LinkedIn right now. Check it out. Okay, so we know that this thing's gummed up a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to prod because I know I've got clean applies there. Or no, I'm actually going to stay here because this is where I can see the suffix issue. So I'm going to plan one more time, see the suffix issue. And then we have 2 ways of solving it. So you can see here again, it's trying to change the suffix because this value is hard-coded here. So we have 2 options. We either expose an additional name so that we can put these suffixes on here. I wouldn't do that. Again, like I got myself in this scenario by using one of the modules that we actually use for production that does all the name prefixing. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to change this from identifier to identifier prefix. And I'm going to do that on prod. And the reason why is when I do that, it's going to show me that it's going to destroy my cluster, which is not what I want. So then I'll be able to take this identifier and I'll be able to go into the state, inject that into the state, reapply it, and it should give me a clean no changes. And then I'll do that exact same process on staging to get the same values there. So we'll go back over to prod real quick. We'll switch this to identifier prefix. We'll see the churn it wants to do there. We'll work through it on prod, get prod nice and ace, and then we'll come back over to staging. It should be pretty cut and dry. If it's not cut and dry, I got a bottle of whiskey waiting in the house for me. Okay, doke. So tofu, let's just go ahead and I'm gonna get this queued up here so I don't do the wrong var file. Sweet. And so Once it changed that maintenance window, I'm actually just going to go ahead and apply this, so I'm not thinking about it. But this was because we switched the code to using that variable. Oh, it's not going to apply because the freaking ID. Very funny. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ignore that for now because we got to come back to this part still. But we can get good plans at least. I keep forgetting about this stupid bug. So I'm going to start with the cluster. Cluster identifier. And I'm going to switch this to cluster identifier prefix equals var name. Now, what I have to do here is the original name you can see up here. I don't know if you caught this. Where is it? But it's the name hyphen that. And I'm almost positive that I think that because they don't want to dictate your naming conventions. The provider just throws on a random, I think it's a timestamp down to like the microsecond or something like that. It just gets appended to the end. I want it to have a hyphen. So I'm going to do that, wipe this out here. Now, actually, before I do that, no, it's fine. We'll go ahead and do tofu plan. It's going to tell me that it's going to destroy this cluster now, which I don't want to do. And it couldn't do it if it wanted to anyway. It's got the whatever's going on with the ID. But what we can see here is, okay, let's pull this out a little bit. Cluster identifier goes away. Cluster identifier prefix. Where do we see it in here? Cluster identifier prefix. Don't have to apply. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the state and we're going to remove the cluster identifier, and they're going to set the proper cluster identifier prefix so that so we can trick the thing. So I'm going to go ahead, and because I know that OpenTofu does not do a very pretty state file, I'm going to do the thing I did earlier: cat terraform prod jq pipe it to pv copy. So we can get a pretty state file, since my VS Code does really not want to. I'm going to navigate to it to make sure I get the right one. Okay, so this RDS cluster identifier, bang, cluster prefix. So there should also be a cluster. There's the suffix. There's the suffix somewhere. Or maybe it doesn't store the suffix. Maybe it derives the suffix because it sees the name come in and it sees you're using the identifier prefix. And then it sees there's a suffix. Maybe that's what it is. I've never actually changed this because I've never got myself in this scenario before. So, well, first time for everything, huh? So I'm just going to change it to the literal value, and then I'll take this out. I don't know if I take this out or make this null. Maybe I'll make this null because I know you can't specify both at the same time, but that one was an empty string, so we'll see. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, right directory. Okay, let me just see here. Let me make sure I'm not thinking anything weird. Cluster identifier prefix is now set. It's the name hyphen, which is what we want. Seeing the cluster identifier as I did this on the. I didn't mean that. I'm not doing this. I did it on the wrong one. That's my problem. It's not the cluster. It's not the cluster. It's the cluster instance. I meant to do this. Whoops. Whoopsie. That one's fun. That one just went down a deep, dark path. I almost went down a deep, dark path. Let's switch this back. That's the cluster identifier I'm aiming for. Jeez, Corey, what are you doing? Where you at, bro? Or not cluster identifier, cluster instance. Okay, cool. So cluster instance, that's the one that I want to change. Wait, is this it? Oh, where's the one at? Yes, this is it right here. This identifier, not the cluster identifier. So this will be identifier prefix. Okay, now I'm going to pop open that state file. Okay, so let's find this guy in here. Cluster identifier. Cluster identifier. Okay, so I'm gonna see what it wants to churn here really quick. Move this over so I have a little more space. Sorry for all the screen shuffling I'm doing. I'm used to having everything so much smaller. So we changed the inputs. Do I have a target on this? Oh, I didn't save it. Duh. Wait, is that it? Oh, sweet. It is magic. So I'm assuming what's happening is, you see that it didn't churn there when I took that off. So I'm assuming what is happening is the cluster prefix, well, we'll see. It might blow up in our face here in a minute. Once we get an actual apply where we can hit the, I don't know, we're refreshing these things. So it's actually getting them. I'm assuming what's happening is it knows what the ARN is now. And maybe there's some logic in the provider that says, oh, I see that I have a prefix. So I know that that is to look at the ARN and see what the end part is. Maybe it doesn't actually cache it in a separate place. That would suck to have it in there in the state file twice. So maybe that's how it's working. There was one other thing, though, in here that we were using. Big fat. Oh, we got to do these subnets, too. These subnets, too. Was the other one that we had to pull out. There was one other prefix. Here it is. Security group. Name prefix. Which should be, actually, I'm going to comment this out just so I don't lose it. And then the VPC ID as well. VPC ID as well. I didn't see the, oh, I know why they're not churning. I was going to say, all right, so we do actually need to pull out the VPC ID here in the subnets, but I don't know if you guys caught it. I thought it was going to say that the staging had diffs there or changes there, but they don't. I just realized these are in the same subnet. I did put them in the same subnet, or in the same subnets in the same VPC for the test environment, because I don't want to build a net new VPC. So we'll need to pull those out as well. So I'm just make a couple of notes here in the variables file. Sweet. So let's go ahead and if this is a clean plan here, then we'll switch over to staging. We should probably have a pretty close to clean plan there as well. Now we know that the cluster won't update because of this weird ID thing that we still need to figure out, but the rest of the resources will, right? Terraform's not atomic, right? Like when you do apply, it doesn't apply everything. It applies what it can, and what it doesn't, it doesn't, right? So when we switch back over to staging, we'll be able to apply and get through all the tag churn and whatnot. And so we should be down to about the same situation as we see right here. Of it wants to change the maintenance window, but it can't because we have this ID issue. So let's go ahead and switch over to Tofu workspace staging. Select staging, Tofu plan var file staging.py bars. Okay, so again, we're gonna go through this one more time. It looks like tags, maintenance window, tags. I'm ready to roll, baby. So we'll apply this. We're going to get 5 successes. We're going to get 1 failure, and then we'll try to figure out what that failure is. But, I mean, lo and behold, we got a few more things to do on this module. But at this point in time, we've backed out 2 different environments to a single module that's being able to manage them both, which is pretty cool. Now, if you're new to Terraform, there's a lot more stuff to do after this. We got to figure out where we're storing our state in reality versus on disk. We got to figure out how we're applying our workflows. We got to figure out where we store our TF vars, etc. Oh, geez. I didn't mean to do that. Switch that. That's not the right thing. That's not what I meant to say. I don't want to destroy and recreate that thing. Okay. Sweet. Let's do this apply one more time. Sweet. Now we should have, the plans should look the same between the two of them. What is this one? There's one left here, which is tags is going away. Oh, can it not? Because now it's organized in the DAG. I think it won't update the instance because it can't update the cluster. The clusters fails. So it's after it in the DAG. So it's after it in the DAG. So I think it's not getting over to apply the tags here. So I'm going to do a targeted apply on the instance. And I think that will let me skip the cluster in the DAG and apply that tag change. And if I could type the word apply. Now am I stuck behind? Yeah, I think I'm stuck behind that in the DAG. Yeah, I am. Okay, so it won't update those tags off the cluster because it's trying to refresh the RDS cluster, but we know that's failing because of this ID issue. But that's fine. Like, we have some stuff that we need to do here to make this a little bit nicer or a little bit more finished or like MVP-ish. But what we'll go ahead and do now is I'm going to switch it back to the Terraform AWS Provider 4 because I know that's what this was created with, to see if I can figure out what's going on with this ID so that we can actually get clean applies here, and then we'll be at parity architecturally with disparity for the things that we need to change from environment to environment. So I'm going to swap back to prod real quick, and then I'm going to start, just because prod has less of a plan difference than staging right now, because when we did this to prod, remember we didn't have the DAG organized. We'll remove a bunch of fields, set to V4, see if we can get a clean apply on prod. And once we do, we'll switch back over to staging, get a clean apply there, and then we're where we're aimed to be. Hopefully I can do it in the next 56 minutes. So tofu, select workspace, tofu plan, var file. Okay, tofu init upgrade. It's a downgrade, but um 4.0. I can't remember. I think it's 4.67 that I'm looking for. Yeah. Who's ready for lunch? I think if there's tags set provider that are identical to tag resource has trouble reconciling, so unless they keep switching between tags and tags off. It will correct. We can also go yank it out of the state, would be another way to kind of clear it up. But it will correct after an apply. It's stuck behind that thing. We saw it for the other, there was 7 resources in there, and the 4 that weren't underneath the RDS cluster in the DAG got theirs updated and cleaned up. It's just this goofy thing that's going on. So we've switched back to 4. Now, when I run this plan, we're going to see a whole bunch of errors because there's a whole bunch of fields in here that don't exist in the 4.x module or 4.x provider. So what we'll do is we'll go in there and we'll yank those out. We should get a clean apply. There's only 3 of them now. Wasn't there like 2,000 a minute ago? Geez, I feel like there was a lot more a few minutes ago. But okay. Could have sworn there was like 18 of them earlier. I'm going to keep these comments in here in case I do need these once we get an actual apply working. Just in case this is in the state file, I don't want to lose it. But rotation period in days, Yank that off. XKS key ID, yank that off. Archive policy. We still also have that goofy IAM policy situation we need to fix, but okay, sweet. So that got passed. It says some more. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of goofy things in here. Is there another rotation period in days? Am I editing the wrong file? Am I in the wrong directory? That would be just purely chaotic if that was the case. No, that's the right one. KMS. Let's see if some of these are getting cleared up. Okay. Let's see, assert identifier line 8. DB system ID. Okay, let's make sure that this is. I feel like I'm losing my mind here. Line 8 CA cert identifier. Robbie, the original goal was 4 hours, but yeah, I mean, if you got to bounce, we are recording the whole thing. I can definitely send it over. We're kind of at the place where we've gotten this to work. It's just trying to debug this provider issue now around the ID and whatever got imported weirdly. So this is me just trying to fix a bug so we can like finalize it. But we will record it, and then pretty much all the steps with a pinning of version next time around will go up on GitHub tomorrow, and we'll send out an email with that. So if you got to bounce, like feel free, and we can get you the video and the session afterwards. It's really interesting how inconsistent that those unsupported arguments are. It's really interesting. Domain IAM role, engine lifecycle support. Custom IAM. It's very interesting. This seemed. Force destroy null. That's a real one. Okay, OpenTofu counter is just resources is managed by newer provider version. Okay, so yeah, so we're in a sticky spot now because whatever's going on with this ID, I want to move back to 4, but the state file is at version provider version in here at 5 point. Very interesting. It's like an upgrade the AWS provider to work with this state. Interesting. AWS RDS cluster. So, yeah, very interesting. Provider. Man, I could hop in and start fiddling with the provider cache, but that might put me in a real deep rabbit hole. I'm gonna try to switch back to 5. I'm curious, yanking some of those attributes to the point that I got this to work. I'm curious, maybe hop back a version to the 5.8, see if I can get that to work with the state file. I wonder if they're close enough in versions that it's not going to freak out about that. But let me ask. Let me ask. Tofu. There we go. Tofu and then upgrade. Turn on state, remove cluster, and then re-import. Yeah, so I was saying is the other option is re-importing it. Yeah, I just want to see if removing those attributes will give me anything here. Make sure I'm on the prod workspace. Dang. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to 4. I'm going to remove it from state. The catch is it's going to do this for every single one. It's just going to do it for every single one. Maybe I'll just go to the newest version of the provider again and then do it from there. Yeah, I'll remove it. I'll try this one more. I'll try this plan one more time. If it doesn't work, then I'll remove it from the state, re-import it into the state, which is fine because the code's already in there. So that should be fine. It'll be really interesting to see what this cluster ID thing is. Okay. Actually, let me just tofu workspace, select prod, apply var file, prod the TFRs. Damn it. Okay, so I'm going to remove this from, I'm going to remove the cluster from the state, and then I'm going to re-import. I'm going to re-import the cluster and see if maybe the code changes, we can get it to hint at the right thing. I'm still really blown away by what is the wrong identifier here on this guy. Let me just want tofu plan. I want to see the output really quick. I know we had the two outputs there. I was trying to debug that earlier. Okay, cluster identifier. Cluster ID. And that is it. I mean, we're not using any sort of suffix on here. Like, that is the identifier for this cluster. These are the same strings, right? Yeah, those are the exact same strings. Very bonkers. So you'll do a tofu state. Actually, let me do. I do want to make sure I have a backup of this for this one. I normally blow these backups away. So we'll go ahead and do RDS cluster.this. Tofu state import. I always forget the syntax for import from the command line. It's just tofu import. Import. Address ID and then the tofu import address and ID. Tofu import AWS RDS cluster.this. The question is which ID? The cluster identifier or the actual ARN. This may have been our problem in the first place. If we go back to the spreadsheet, what do we use for the cluster? We did use the ARN. Now, we used the ARN last time, so I'm going to use just the ID this time to see if that maybe is it, that one of the, right? Because like some of these imported with this, some of these import with the ID. SNS topic came in fine using the ARN, but maybe cluster takes the ID for the import instead of the ARN. Maybe that's how we got in this mess. Yeah, we'll go ahead and give that a go. See what happens. Oops. What did I do here? I think I put the, I think those have to be at the end. Tofu import. Tofu import. Is it tofu? Gosh, I can never remember this. var file prod import AWS RDS. I just copy and paste this. Probably gonna do it 3 times. You remember the order these go in. No. Tofu import var file prod.tf vars. Okay. All right, Joe, here we go, dude. See if this is it. There's something goofy. Ha! There we go. It looks like it is modifying. Sweet. So now what we can do is we can switch back over to staging. I think we're gonna have a clean apply here. Hopefully, let's see how long it takes for it to apply this maintenance window change. I hope it's not one of those ones that takes 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, you know what? I don't know if it overwrote the backup, but I'd actually be very curious in diffing the backup in the state to see what exactly. Oh, there we go. Yeah, remember that was an ARN earlier. So that's what it is. That's a good thing to know. Next time we do this, the ID for a cluster is not the ARN, it is the ID. That's the root of the problem there. See, that's what kind of sucks is like, that's one, like, it's interesting too, because here's the thing that's really, really curious about this is that imported, it just didn't work after it was imported. It brought in the state. That was not the same with the KMS key and the security group. It didn't end up in the generated code at all, right? So some inconsistency there in the provider where the ARN was acceptable to fetch the information for the RDS cluster, but not to manage it. Whereas the KMS key, the ARN wasn't acceptable. It had to literally be like the strict ID. So that's pretty bonkers. It's pretty bonkers. I also changed the wrong cluster. Here it is. I'll update that. Make it easier for everybody else when they follow along on GitHub. So that looks good. So now we should be able to do a tofu plan var file prod.tf vars. We should be clean here. Swap the staging. We'll probably have to do the same state add and remove. That's fine. I think there's still one tag that we're waiting on. Var file staging tf vars. This is going to fail the apply for the same reason. Actually, we'll look at. I'll pop open before I do this the remove and add. I want to pop it open and just look at the state file really quick and see what's goofed up under there. But my assumption is cat Terraform state staging. So this is the staging one. So this is the one that is gummed up still. And then this will be the prod one that is fixed. Well, fixed, it is fixed. RDS cluster identifier. Well, I'll be damned. Okay. That's fun. Is there anything else in here that looks goofy? Between the two of them. That's real. That's real strange. Because it looks like the cluster identifier did actually import as such. Don't know, but anyway, it's still not working in staging. But if we remove and add it, I bet it will. Actually, let's just see in staging. Let's try to plan it real quick. Apply it real quick. No, so we'll do the same thing here where we are going to do tofu state remove resource address is RDS cluster.this. And then we're going to go, I'm going to just go back to that last command since I botched it a couple of times. So the only difference here is this is staging. This is staging. Then rerun that apply. I don't know, man. I might go through this one more time and import it both ways and see what the diff is in the state file. I didn't see any diff between the format of the data in the staging that was still corrupted and in the prod. The attributes all look the same. That was very, very interesting. But yeah, it turns out that was not a provider bug. It's just that, I mean, it's interesting. It's one of those interesting nuances, right? Like there's a couple of resources that you see, like, seems like somebody had like some naming changes over the years. So like clusters output an ARN, an ID, and an identifier. And apparently the ID and the identifier are supposed to be the same thing, as we can see now here, whereas before it wasn't. I think we were getting the identifier was the ARN before, despite the fact that we're inputting the name, right, which we know is just that there. So we're good. We got these two things at parity. Now there's still stuff to do, like to make this better, like I said, but there's always more work to do in making your Terraform better. So where we're at now, so that's great. They're in parity. That we have one module managing both of these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of close this stuff out real quick. I'm going to move up a directory, and then essentially I've got, hopefully I don't accidentally nuke this, but I was kind of working underneath this Aurora Postgres, and I had a directory for each. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring that up just to one top level module. Now, what we won't do in here is like figure out how to run this stuff. Like, do you want to put it in Atlantis, whatnot? I mean, I'd suggest putting it in Mass Driver. We're much better at building orchestration systems and figuring out what ID we put in wrong, apparently. So we got the staging one. We nuked that one. So we just have this one now that we're kind of working through. We got these two TF vars here. We got our two workspaces. The only other thing that I would do on this one is kind of work through the rest of these VPCs and subnets that are still hard-coded in this module. So I'm going to go ahead and blast through those really quick. And then this module will essentially be like buttoned up. Now, again, is this a module I'd toss into production? Yeah, maybe. Like if we're only doing two databases, this is great. This does what it needs to, right? Like I wouldn't do the work to expose 20 more fields that we haven't been setting, right? Now, if my engineers are like, hey, I need to set this field, then it's like, oh yeah, let's start thinking about like what the outside of this thing looks like. What do we want to expose, right? So, but for now, we'll just go ahead and we'll just kind of pop through these last couple of variables here. So I got the prod and staging variables here. I'll do variable VPC ID, type equals string, and variable subnet IDs. Okay. You know what they say? It takes a community to raise a cloud. Okie doke. So we'll add these two, VPC ID equals, and then subnet ID is equal. Add that to these two. And then we'll hop over to the code. So we got these subnet IDs here. So it's the same on both of them. These happen to be in the same subnet. So this is pretty straightforward for here. Just kind of pop these in, and then the VPC ID. There's only one place that we had this. Don't need that anymore. ABC ID. ABC ID. Okie doke. Now we should have tofu workspace select staging, tofu plan, var file. Bingo, all backed out. Workspace select prod, tofu plan, var file. Bingo, bango, bongo. I don't want to leave the Congo. We're good. So we've gotten to the point now that we have a single module. It's pretty basic, but it's good. We like it. Other things, I mean, right, like at this point in time, like we're managing these. These both happen to have the same engine version, right? This is probably something you want to expose, right? Other things I'd kind of do through here is go through this and clean up, any of these files that you don't want to, or sorry, these attributes you don't necessarily care about, right? Database name is probably set in there. It doesn't come back in the API result maybe. But like DB cluster class, like I can yank that out. Parameter group, I can yank that out if I don't have parameter groups, right? Deletion protection, and apply immediately, allow major version upgrades. Like these are probably things that you want to set, right? Like I would want to expose apply immediately as a variable, right? So whoever's calling it has control over whether the config is going to hit now or during the maintenance window. This module is definitely not done, but we've gotten to a point where it is technically able to manage either of these environments. It's just not super configurable, right? And so like this is like the next step of kind of walking through and thinking about like, what do I make my modules look like? Now, I got something for you all for sticking around, and that is a really sweet workshop we already did on this. So building DevX. There should be it. Hey, there we are. So we did actually do a workshop on this. That's not it. That's the announcement of the workshop. Here we are. So we actually did do a workshop on this a few weeks back. I'll drop the links here. So like this is kind of the next thing. Is like, okay, we've got some IAC under management, or some cloud resources under management with IAC. Like now, what do we do to like make a really good module? And so we did a workshop on this a few weeks back. There's a YouTube video as well. And guess what? I didn't run into a weird import thing when I was working on this. So it's a pretty good one. But that's it right there. So I'll drop the link for YouTube as well. So we got a module. So we started out with nothing, right? We kind of went through a spreadsheet. We kind of cataloged our resources, and we ran into one unfortunate thing. Normally, when you kind of go through that loop of generating the imports and running the imports, you'll get an error immediately that the import wasn't recognizable based off of the ID. We happen to hit an extremely weird one where it was able to import but not update using the same identifier that we gave it. Unfortunate. Lesson learned. Wrinkle made in my head. How many others are like that? I'm not positive, right? So, I mean, there's just quirks in like the naming and how the providers work. They're super complicated pieces of software. But that might be something to take into account. Like I know my next time around, if I do that and I see it's like something super bizarre about the ID not working, first thing I'm going to do is hop back to that spreadsheet, change the ID, and rerun it through my pipeline. But yeah, kind of going back to the beginning, like that I think the spreadsheet, it seems so naive and simple and goofy to like start around a spreadsheet. But if you got a team of any number of ops people that are working on this, if it's not just you sitting, I mean, even you sitting alone, I'd say put a spreadsheet. But if you got 2 or 3 or 4 people working on taking a lot of cloud resources and generating ISC, having some central place where you all kind of catalog, like, hey, these are the types of tags that we want. Here's the classes of tags. You can apply naming conventions nice and cleanly, and then just use the tools that are there, whether you're using the tofu import command or whether you're using something like Terraformer. I think it still makes sense to start with a spreadsheet to kind of organize that. And then from there, I'd say like, don't worry about designing the perfect module, right? Like you got to take adopting IAC in steps. It's a Herculean effort, right? I mean, for folks that are working in Terraform and OpenTofu today, like it's very easy for us to see like, oh, we do this IAC thing. It's so easy. but there's like the adoption rate of IAC across all tech orgs is like 38%, something wild like that. Most organizations aren't doing it today. And so I think it's really important. It's obviously, it's one of the things you have to do to get into really good operations, understanding your systems, being able to reproduce things, having good disaster recovery. There's a lot of orgs that are just nowhere close. And when you kind of get into IAC and the first thing you jump to is how do I get all this stuff under management? That's hard, right? And there's a lot of tools out there that like claim to do it that are products as well. And we've checked out a few, we've considered partnering with a few, but lo and behold, many of them land you in that very early spot that we started, which was you run the import and you get a module for managing this bag of resources. There's no abstraction there. And I'd say there's not a lot of value in having a module that manages a very specific piece of infrastructure that can't reproduce others. So, taking steps to get there, start with a small greenfield project if you're first adopting IAC. When you start getting into even importing stuff, I might not dump the entirety of your AWS into a module like that, right? Because the reality is this little Terraform script that I wrote, or Terraform script, this little Ruby script that I wrote here is very much how I like my workflow to go, right? You might be in an org where you need to do directories per environment. Maybe that's the way that everything else is done, right? Maybe you started your journey in 2018 and that was the way people were still doing it and you don't want to divert from that. Well, then you need to make a little modification here. But I think one of the really nice things about starting with the spreadsheet and then just writing a small script is this is 56 lines of code and it did most of the work for me, right? I got to centralize and think about what I wanted this to look like. Anybody on my team could grab it. You could go so far as to add in another field in that CSV file that's like, hey, who's working on this? Corey. And I can have my little script here that just filters it out down to Corey stuff, right? So I think having that central database of all the resources you're trying to get under management is important. And I think kind of thinking through those baby steps of getting yourself from no IC to everything 100% under infrastructure as code where it makes sense, you got to take baby steps. So when you get into importing, don't go hit 15,000 resources. Start small, figure out like, what does my flow look like? Can I get an idea of what resources are ID-based versus ARN-based, right? It's very different, by the way, when you start doing this for Azure and GCP. I'll just have you know. Azure and GCP have, for as much of those clouds get shit, they have very sane identifiers for their stuff. They're all URLs. So they're not, all this fidgety information kind of packed in a weird format. So it's much easier to do these there because you don't have to worry about like figuring out the right type of identifier. You just put in the URL, like essentially the URL path. But take this in chunks too. Like get an idea of what your flow is, get an idea of like how you want to work through this, how you're going to spot these weird errors, and then from there kind of scale up the amount of resources that you're doing. Getting an idea of these tags. This is one thing I didn't do in this that I would be doing next. I'd be kind of looking at that module, figuring out what additional variables to expose. And then the next thing I'd be doing is taking this exact same database of information I have here, and I write another little Ruby script that literally went through and said, okay, generate a additional prod-tags.tf-vars, because you can load multiple TF-var files at a time, for Aurora Postgres. And I would set all of these tags in it, right? So if you have one team member who's working on getting all this stuff in infrastructure as code, and then you have another team member who's working on your tagging strategy, you can actually do that in parallel without blocking each other. You don't have to wait for them to get the tags done, and they don't have to wait for you to get the infrastructure as code done. You can do these two things in parallel, come back to this central place where you've kind of monitored and managed all of your infrastructure, rewrite that script to dump some tags for each one of these. So seems like a silly tool, but this is the first thing I go to besides the AWS CLI to start getting resource IDs. But yeah, I hope this was exciting for everybody. I hope it was fun. I hope it was interesting. We'll make sure to put in the notes of the YouTube video to skip the fucking hour and a half where we're trying to figure out what's wrong with this ID. Yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to drop them. My email address is it's Corey@massdriver.cloud. Always happy to shoot the shit and talk about cloud operations and whatnot. I'll throw my email address there. If you have any questions about this, also feel free to hit me up or open an issue on the GitHub. And as soon as we end this session, it'll send out the video, but we'll send out the YouTube link in the GitHub doc or the GitHub repo tomorrow morning. Awesome. Thanks so much, Joe. Awesome idea on removing it from the state. You are a savior. I was about to ghosts drown my sorrows. Awesome, all. Thanks so much.